Hey there, story lovers. This is Omni Wizard, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Harry Potter found the Infinity Stones before Hogwarts and became too dangerous for Dumbledore? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Rubble. The day Harry found the stones, he was running for his life. Not in any dramatic sense, no dark wizards, no monsters, nothing that would make a good story later. Just Dudley and his 4 friends, all of them bigger than Harry, all of them bored on a Tuesday afternoon in July, and all of them very interested in the game they'd invented called Harry hunting. Harry had a 30-second head start in shoes with a hole in the left sole, and he was 9 years old and he ran like the world depended on it because, as far as he could tell, his world did. He cut through Mrs. Fig's back garden, she was out, thank God, vaulted a low fence with more grace than a 9-year-old had any right to, and sprinted down the alley behind Magnolia Crescent where the bins smelled like 3-day-old takeaway and the pavement was cracked and uneven. He could hear Dudley behind him, wheezing already because Dudley was many things but athletic wasn't one of them. The others were faster, Piers especially, who was thin and mean in the way that thin, mean boys often were. Harry took a corner hard, skidded, kept his feet, and found himself facing a chain-link fence he didn't remember being there. Beyond it was a construction site, or had been once. The machinery was gone. The project had apparently collapsed along with whatever funding had started it, leaving behind a half-dug foundation, some concrete barriers, and a lot of muddy nothing. He heard Piers shout something behind him. Harry hit the fence at a run, found a handhold, went up and over with the kind of desperate athleticism that is only possible when the alternative is getting your head dunked in a toilet, and dropped down onto the other side. His left shoe hit a patch of loose gravel and he went down hard on one knee, tore his jeans, felt the sting of it, ignored it. He was up in 3 seconds and moving deeper into the site. The foundation was maybe 40 feet across, a rectangular pit with concrete walls, already half filled with standing water and rubble from where one of the temporary support structures had given way. A yellow caution sign lay face down in the mud. Harry circled the edge of it, looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to wait until Dudley got tired, which usually took about 20 minutes if Harry could stay out of sight long enough. He found the gap almost by accident. One section of the foundation wall had buckled, not collapsed entirely, but shifted, creating a dark space maybe 3 feet wide and 5 feet tall where the concrete had separated from the soil behind it. It smelled like cold water and old stone, and it was dark enough that from 10 feet away you wouldn't know it was there at all. Harry looked at it, looked back over his shoulder, heard Piers's voice getting closer. He went in. The space behind the wall was bigger than it had any right to be. That was the first wrong thing. He could tell almost immediately that he'd stepped into something that wasn't just a gap in a broken concrete slab. The floor sloped downward, smooth stone under his feet, and the darkness had a quality to it that was different from ordinary dark. Colder, older, like stepping into a room that had been sealed for a very long time and had developed its own particular silence. Harry stood very still and listened. Nothing from outside. The sounds of the construction site, wind, distant traffic, Piers's voice had cut off completely, which was strange because he hadn't gone far enough into the earth for that. He took another step forward, then another, one hand trailing along the wall. The stone was smooth and slightly curved, and after about 15 feet it opened up into something larger, a chamber roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across. Harry couldn't see it so much as feel it, the way the air changed, the way sound started to have a different quality, with a faint echo where before there had been none. And then there was light, not bright, nothing sudden or dramatic. A faint colored glow from the center of the chamber floor, where 6 stones sat in a rough circle, each one a little larger than a golf ball, each one a different color. Blue, yellow, red, purple, green, orange, they glowed like embers, like they were breathing. Harry stared at them for a long moment. Every sensible instinct he'd ever developed, the ones that had kept him fed and unkicked and more or less intact through 9 years of living with the Dursleys, told him to back away slowly and pretend he hadn't seen anything. He walked forward instead. He crouched down in front of them. This close he could feel warmth coming off them, though the air in the chamber was cold. The blue one pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The yellow one seemed to be watching him, which was impossible because it was a rock, and Harry knew that, and yet, he reached out and touched the blue one. The world didn't explode. Nobody showed up to warn him. No voice boomed from the ceiling. What happened was quieter than that, and stranger. The stone was warm against his fingers, and for one single second Harry felt everything, not everything in the chamber, not everything in Little Winging, but everything, the whole enormous sprawling fact of the universe laid out like a map he could read. every point in space connected to every other point, distance just a number, barriers just a suggestion. He felt the construction site above him, and Mrs. Fig's garden beyond it, and London 40 minutes north, and the ocean beyond that, and beyond the ocean other continents, and beyond the continents the curve of the Earth itself, and beyond Earth it lasted 1 second. Then it compressed back down to something manageable, something quiet that sat at the back of his mind like a coal that had cooled to the point where it didn't burn anymore, just waited. Harry picked up the blue stone. It fit in his palm like it had always belonged there. He picked up the yellow one. The Mind Stone, though he didn't know that name yet, flared warm and gold, and he felt the sudden, overwhelming awareness of the two boys outside the fence, their irritation, their boredom, the way Piers was already losing interest and Dudley's feet hurt. He felt it as clearly as if they'd told him directly. He picked up all 6. He held them in both hands, the 6 stones together, and he closed his eyes. Nothing dramatic. The ground didn't shake. The chamber didn't fill with light. What happened was internal and invisible and completely, utterly irreversible. The stones didn't merge with him exactly. It was more like they recognized him, the way a lock recognizes the right key, and opened. When Harry walked back out through the gap in the wall, Dudley and Piers were already gone. He'd known they would be before he'd even moved. He stood in the late afternoon sun with 6 smooth stones in his jacket pocket, and the feeling that something enormous had just shifted in the structure of his life, though he couldn't have said what. He walked home. He made Uncle Vernon's tea. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't tell anyone for 2 years. The second summer after finding the stones, Harry was 11 and no longer afraid of anything in the house on Privet Drive, though he was careful to act as though he was. He'd learned early that acting frightened when you weren't cost nothing, and it kept people from wondering about you, which was valuable. The Dursleys weren't particularly observant. They noticed what confirmed what they already believed and ignored the rest, but Harry had also learned that people could surprise you, so he remained careful. He kept the stones in his jacket pocket at first, then made a small leather pouch for them from a piece of old belt he found in a bin. He carried them everywhere. He wasn't sure what would happen if he left them behind, and he didn't want to find out. What he discovered in those 2 years, working quietly and methodically in the way that children do when they have no one to ask and must figure everything out themselves, was that the stones weren't a set of tools you picked up and put down. They were more like a new set of senses. He didn't cast spells with them, not exactly. He just intended things and they happened. The space stone had been the most immediately practical. He'd learned, about 3 weeks after finding them, that he could step through space the way other people stepped through doorways. The first time he'd done it intentionally, he'd meant to cross the kitchen and ended up in the back garden, which had been startling but also, he'd noted, actually quite useful. By the time he was 10, he could go anywhere he'd been before without any particular effort. By 11, he could go anywhere he could clearly visualize, which had opened the public library to him in a significant way. He'd spent a lot of time at the library. He'd found a section on particle physics and read it twice. He'd found a section on mythology and read it 3 times, looking for something that would tell him what the stones were, because the word infinity had come to him one night in a dream said in a voice that wasn't quite any voice he recognized. And when he'd gone looking for it in books, he'd found scattered references in texts on cosmology, and in a few slim, strange volumes, shelved badly in the mythology section, as though whoever had organized the library wasn't sure where to put them. The references were fragmentary and contradictory. They agreed on one thing: the stones were old in a way that made the universe itself seem young. Beyond that, the books disagreed. Harry decided that was fine. He knew what they did, what they were could wait. The Mind Stone had taken longer to understand and longer to trust. The first time he genuinely reached into someone else's emotional state, really reached, not just passively sensed the surface the way he'd done with Dudley and Piers that first day, had been with Uncle Vernon, who'd been in one of his moods, building towards something ugly, and Harry had felt what was underneath the rage. Not sympathy exactly. He'd found, with some surprise, that he was capable of understanding Vernon Dursley without feeling anything particularly warm toward him, but information. He'd known exactly when to disappear upstairs, exactly how long to stay quiet, and Vernon's mood had crested and broken without Harry anywhere near the blast radius. He'd done it again and again until it was second nature, navigating Privet Drive like a sea he'd learned to read. He'd also discovered, one cold November night when he was 10, that he could do something with the reality stone that he had no name for. He'd been lying in his cupboard under the stairs, looking at the sloped ceiling, and he'd thought very clearly, "I want a blanket," and the air had folded, and there had been a blanket. An old one slightly moth-eaten, a faded blue that might once have been brighter, but warm and real and absolutely there in a way that couldn't be explained. He'd used it very sparingly after that because something about it felt like pulling threads in a fabric, and he wasn't sure how many threads you could pull before the fabric had a problem. He'd experimented enough to know it worked best on small things, changes to what was already there, rather than pure creation from nothing. The world, he'd found, resisted being asked to produce something from absolute zero. It was more flexible about being asked to change. The Power Stone he'd worked out not to use unnecessarily, after the incident in June of his second summer, when he'd been frustrated and slapped his hand against the garden wall, and the wall had cracked end to end. The Dursleys had stared at the crack for a week, deeply unsettled, and Harry had looked appropriately bewildered alongside them, while privately noting that he should probably think before doing anything physical when he was angry. The Time Stone's gift, that fractional awareness of what was about to happen, had started subtle and grown gradually clearer. He didn't see the future. It was more that the present became very loud. He knew about 2 seconds before it happened, when someone was about to open a door, when a car was about to pull out from a driveway, when the next thing out of Aunt Petunia's mouth was going to be a complaint versus a question. 2 seconds wasn't much, but 2 seconds he'd found was enough. The Soul Stone was the one he thought about most and understood least. It connected him to living things in a way that sometimes felt like standing in a crowded room where everyone was talking at once. Plants had a kind of low, vegetative hum. Animals were clearer. The neighbor's cat had strong opinions about the state of the garden and communicated them with great frequency. People were the most complex and the most overwhelming. He'd learned to turn it down to something manageable, like lowering a radio volume, but he never turned it all the way off because he'd tried that once and the silence had been actively terrible. It turned out he'd grown so accustomed to the background music of living things that its absence felt like going deaf. He'd never told Dudley to stop. He'd never warned the Dursleys to treat him better. He'd never once shown them what he could do, not because he was afraid of what they'd think, but because he found he genuinely didn't care what they thought. They weren't relevant to him anymore, really. They were a place he slept and ate and waiting was something he was entirely prepared to do. He was waiting for whatever came next. It arrived on a Tuesday in late July, in the form of a very large man who destroyed the front gate without apparently noticing it. Harry was in the kitchen making breakfast when he felt it, not through the Time Stone's usual fractional warning, but through the Soul Stone, a presence so enormous and warm and fundamentally good that it stopped him mid-motion with the frying pan. He'd felt individual people plenty of times and developed a fairly nuanced sense of what they felt like. Most people were complicated, anxiety and affection and irritation all running in parallel. This person, whoever they were, felt like a fireplace in December, just warmth all the way down. He heard the knock on the door, felt Dudley's surprise. The knock had apparently shaken the door in its frame. Heard Vernon's voice going loud and then immediately quieter in the specific way it did when Vernon was frightened and trying not to show it. Harry set down the frying pan and walked to the kitchen doorway. The man in the door, he barely fit in it, which said something, because the door was standard size and this man was not, had a wild black beard and kind eyes, and was wearing a coat that appeared to have been made from several different animals who hadn't entirely agreed to the arrangement. He was looking around the Dursleys' living room with the expression of someone who found it deeply odd. His eyes landed on Harry. "Harry Potter," he said. His voice was enormous, warm as firewood, with an accent Harry couldn't quite place. "Last time I saw ye were about this big." He held his hand at roughly knee height. "Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. And I've got a letter for ye." "He won't be going anywhere," said Uncle Vernon, who had apparently decided that fear was a worse impression to give than aggression, and was now positioned between Hagrid and Harry in the manner of someone who had made a strategic error and was committed to it. Harry had already known about Hogwarts. He'd felt the letter before it arrived, several letters, actually, an ongoing avalanche of them that the Dursleys had been intercepting with escalating desperation for the past week. He'd also known, in the general way he knew things now, that eventually someone would come in person. He'd been curious what sort of person they'd send. He hadn't expected someone this warm. "It's fine," Harry said, moving past Vernon without looking at him. "Hello, I'm Harry." Hagrid beamed at him like he was the best thing he'd seen in years. "I know who ye are. Blimey, ye have got your mother's eyes. She'd have been well." He cleared his throat. "Here, letter's official and all, but the important thing is happy birthday, Harry. Bit late, I know." Harry took the letter, glanced at it, pocketed it. "Thank you. You said Hogwarts. Is that the school?" "Best school in the world for young witches and wizards." Hagrid shot a look at the Dursleys that was not precisely threatening, but conveyed clearly that he was aware of certain things. You do know, don't ya, that you're a wizard? Yes, Harry said. Hagrid blinked. Right, well, he seemed to have prepared for more resistance. Good, that's good. We'll need to go to Diagon Alley for your school things. Got a list. He produced a second copy of a list from an inside pocket. Robes, books, cauldron, and Yale need a wand, of course. Most important thing. I don't need a wand, Harry said. The room went very quiet. I what? Hagrid said. I mean, I'll get one, Harry said, because he'd thought about this and he did want a wand. He was curious about wand magic, which worked on entirely different principles from what he did with the stones, and curiosity was basically a physical compulsion with him at this point. I just meant I've been doing magic without one, for a while. Kids do sometimes, Hagrid said carefully. Accidental magic before training. It hasn't been accidental, Harry said. Another silence. He could feel Hagrid turning something over, recategorizing, working out how to respond. Not afraid, which Harry appreciated, mostly just surprised and recalculating. Right, Hagrid said slowly. Well, that's a conversation we'll sort that as we go. For now, what d'ye say to London? I've never had the chance to personally take Harry Potter to buy his first wand. Don't want to miss it. I'd like that, Harry said and meant it. He didn't say goodbye to the Dursleys. They didn't say goodbye to him. He picked up the small bag he'd packed 3 days ago when he'd known this was coming, and he walked out of number 4 Privet Drive and into the rest of his life without looking back even once. Diagon Alley was, by any measure, remarkable. Harry had known there were other people like him, other people who could do things, who came from a world parallel to the ordinary one, but knowing it and standing in it were two completely different things. He stood in the middle of the busy alley, people in robes moving around him, owls calling from somewhere, the smell of something that might be potions from a shop to his left and fresh bread from somewhere to his right, and he felt with the soul stone the 100 different people around him, and every single one of them alive and buzzing and magical. And it was the first time in his life a crowd had felt comfortable. Hagrid navigated it with the ease of someone who did this regularly, and the occasional booming announcement of common through that parted people like a ship through water. He shepherded Harry through Madame Malkin's robes, in Harry's preferred dark colors, fitted with pleasant efficiency by a woman who chatted without requiring responses, and through Flourish and Blots, where Harry moved through the shelves with controlled speed and added 3 books to his list that weren't on it because they were on subjects that interested him, and now that he had money he saw no reason not to. The money was a revelation of its own kind. The vault in Gringotts, the underground cart ride, the dragon-guarded depths of it, the moment the door swung open on more gold than he could easily count, had landed on him with a complicated weight. Not excitement, exactly. Something more like settling, like a debt being acknowledged. He'd taken what seemed reasonable and left the rest. He'd noted the other vault, the one Hagrid visited briefly, and came away from with a small package wrapped in brown paper, and said nothing about it, though he could feel through the stone walls that whatever was in that vault was interesting in a very specific way that he filed away for later. Ollivander's was last. The shop was narrow and quiet and smelled like wood shavings and something older, and Mr. Ollivander himself appeared from between shelves with the suddenness of someone who understood that a good entrance required patience. He was pale and silver-eyed, and he looked at Harry the way people looked at things they found genuinely surprising. "Harry Potter," he said, "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." He paused, his eyes dropping to where Harry's hands hung at his sides. "And I see, yes, I see." "Do you?" Harry said. "Something about you is different," Ollivander said. He didn't seem disturbed by this so much as professionally fascinated. "Most children come in here empty. You come in full, already full." "I have some things with me," Harry said carefully. "More than some things." Ollivander looked at him steadily. "You still want a wand. I'm curious how they work, different principles." Ollivander's mouth curved. "Very different principles, yes. Wands focus intent through a channel, wood, and core in combination, each pair creating a slightly different relationship between the caster and the spell. A language, if you like, with its own grammar." He reached for a box. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Try this." Harry took it. He felt nothing from it, no recognition, no resonance. He gave it a wave anyway, noting the mechanism of it, the way the magic wanted to move through it. A vase on the counter rattled. "Perhaps not," Ollivander said, returning it. He reached for another, then another. Harry tried 7 in quick succession, learning something from each one about how wand magic organized itself, feeling Ollivander watching him with growing fascination. "You're not searching for the right wand," Ollivander said eventually. "No," Harry agreed. "I'm learning how they work." "And have you?" "Getting there," Harry considered. "What's the most interesting wand you have?" Ollivander went still. Then slowly, with the care of someone handling something they rarely touched, he went to the very back of the shop and returned with a box that was older than the others, the wood of it gone dark with age. 11.5 inches, he said, opening it. Elder wood with a core of something that has no very clean name in English. It is the most powerful wand I have ever made. It has sat here because no one has ever been quite right for it. Harry picked it up. The wand recognized him immediately, with a warmth that wasn't unlike the stones, different in quality but similar in character, the feeling of something finding its correct place. Gold sparks drifted from the tip like slow fireworks, turning lazy circles in the dusty air of the shop. Ollivander watched them with an expression Harry couldn't immediately categorize. It was somewhere between wonder and the particular solemnity of someone who has just realized they're standing at a turning point in history. Well, the old man said quietly, I wonder what you'll do with all of it. Hopefully, Harry said, putting the wand away in his pocket alongside the leather pouch of stones, something interesting. Outside, Hagrid was waiting with an ice cream that had gone slightly soft in the heat, and an expression on his face that suggested the afternoon had given him a great deal to think about. Harry took the ice cream when it was offered, strawberry, which he'd never had before and which was extraordinary, and they walked back toward the leaky cauldron in the late afternoon sun while the alley hummed and glittered around them. Hagrid, Harry said after a few minutes of companionable quiet. Voldemort, can you tell me about him? Hagrid went slightly stiff, as Harry had known he would. He'd known the name would do that. He'd felt the collective flinch every time he'd accidentally projected the name into the ambient emotional field of the alley, which had happened twice. He'd need to remember that. They don't say that name, Harry. You know it though. Yeah, Hagrid exhaled. Yeah, he were the most feared dark wizard in a century, maybe ever. Murdered your parents, Harry. I'm sorry to be plain about it, but I know, Harry said. I know he tried to kill me too. I know something stopped him. I'd like to know what. Hagrid looked at him for a long moment, the ice cream forgotten in his enormous hand, a drip running down his wrist. Nobody knows what. Your mother, she died for you, and whatever that did, whatever magic that made, it were enough. The killing curse bounced back off ye, left you with that scar in him. Well, he were gone, almost gone. He paused. Why are ye asking about this? Because I'm going to his old school, Harry said simply. I'd like to know what I'm walking into. Hagrid was quiet for a moment. Then he said with great feeling, You're gonna do all right, Harry. Better'n all right, I reckon. Harry thought of the stones in his pocket. He thought of 2 years of patience and learning and waiting. He thought of the vault underground and the small wrapped package in Hagrid's pocket. I know, he said. He wasn't being arrogant. He was just being accurate. The leaky cauldron swallowed them up, full of noise and lamplight and people, and Harry felt every one of them through the quiet background hum of the soul stone, their conversations and laughter and private sorrows overlapping. The whole living chaos of a world he was only just beginning to enter. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was genuinely glad to be here. He was also watching the shadows, because the thing about being able to feel everything he'd learned was that you noticed what was missing. And something in this world, somewhere not far enough away, felt like a cold spot in warm water, like absence shaped like a person. He'd worry about that later. For now, there was ice cream and a new school, and a world that didn't yet know what it had let through its doors. Harry Potter ate his ice cream and smiled, and the evening sun caught the lightning bolt scar on his forehead and made it look, for a moment, like it was still burning. Chapter 2, The Sorting of Something Else. The Hogwarts Express left from platform 9:75 at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was there at 10:15, because he'd learned early that arriving first meant you got to watch everyone else arrive, which was almost always more interesting than being watched yourself. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, not the front, where people would cluster out of eagerness, not the back, where people went to avoid being found, and he sat with his bag stowed above him and his wand in his pocket, and the stones warm against his hip, and he watched the platform fill up through the window. Families, mostly. The pattern of them was immediately legible. The ones who'd done this before moved with a particular ease, the older siblings already half gone emotionally, 1 foot in the world on the other side of the barrier. The ones doing it for the first time were the interesting ones. He could see the mixture of excitement and terror without even reaching for the soul stone. It was right there on their faces, vivid and unguarded. A red-haired family spilled through the barrier like a small, cheerful flood. 2 boys who must have been at least 15 or 16, already in robes, moving with the confidence of returning students. A girl about 12, bouncing slightly on her heels. a woman in green robes who counted heads with the automatic focus of someone who'd been doing it for years. And at the back, a little separated, a boy Harry's age with ears going red in the cold, and a smear of something on his nose that might have been ink or might have been dirt, looking up at the train with an expression of uncomplicated delight that Harry found unexpectedly affecting. That one's going to be fine, he thought, not knowing yet how right he was. Through the window on the other side, a girl arrived alone, dragging a trunk that was slightly too big for her, with bushy brown hair and the focused energy of someone who had prepared extensively for this and was now executing the plan. She had 3 books tucked under her arm that weren't school issue. Harry could read 2 of the titles from here, one on advanced charms theory and one on the history of magical governance in Britain, and he made a mental note that whoever she was, he wanted to talk to her. He watched and waited. The platform filled and thinned as people boarded. He felt distantly a cluster of people on the platform that had a particular quality, not unfriendly exactly, but polished in a way that spoke of money and expectation, an emotional signature like walking into a room that had been carefully decorated to impress. He glanced out and saw a blond boy, hair almost white, standing with 2 large companions, and a man with the same coloring who was speaking quietly to him. The boy's face was arranged in an expression of calm superiority that Harry recognized immediately as something learned rather than felt. Underneath it, through the faint ambient reading of the Soul Stone, was something more ordinary, a knot of anxiety about whether he'd do well enough, about whether the world at school would match the one his father had described. Harry had some sympathy for that, though he suspected the blond boy would not thank him for it. The train lurched into motion at 11 exactly, and the platform slid away, and Harry watched London disappear and be replaced by the outskirts of London, which became the actual countryside, which became the kind of deep green rolling hills that Harry had only ever seen on television or in library books, and which turned out to be in person rather beautiful. He was thinking about the small wrapped package from Gringotts, now presumably in someone's possession somewhere in this castle they were heading toward, and about the cold spot he'd felt in Diagon Alley that had followed him faintly ever since, a background wrongness like a note played slightly off-key. He was turning these things over with the calm attention he gave to all puzzles when the compartment door slid open. It was the red-haired boy. He was holding a rat with a slightly glazed expression in a cage, and he had a trunk that was held shut with what appeared to be a piece of rope, and he was looking at Harry with the specific expression of someone who hopes they're not intruding, but also really needs somewhere to sit. "Is it all right if everywhere else is full," he said. "Sit down," Harry said. "It's fine." The boy dropped into the seat across from him with the relief of someone whose arms were giving out. He deposited the rat cage on the seat beside him, and the rat, a fat gray thing with a slightly unfocused look, immediately went to sleep. "Ron Weasley," he said. He said it quickly, like he'd predecided to get it out first. "Harry Potter," Harry said. The flash of recognition was visible. Ron's eyes went quickly to Harry's forehead and then, with obvious effort, away from it. Harry noted the effort and appreciated it. "Brilliant," Ron said, and then looked mortified at having said it. "Sorry. I mean, I know that's people probably say that to you all It's fine," Harry said and smiled because it actually was. Ron's reaction was clean and honest in a way that Harry found refreshing. No calculation in it, no attempt to leverage the recognition into anything, just surprise and enthusiasm, badly managed. "Relax, do you want some?" He looked at the empty seat beside him and then, because the candy trolley had come and gone already, reached into his bag and produced a bar of chocolate he'd bought at King's Cross, broke it in half, and held out the larger piece. Ron took it with visible relief. "Cheers." He bit into it. "Is it true you can do magic outside of school? Fred and George, my brothers, they said they heard someone say, but I don't know where they heard it." "Information travels fast," Harry said. "So it's true, more or less." Harry ate a piece of chocolate. "How much do you know about the theory behind why wands work?" Ron blinked at the sudden pivot. Not much. I mean, I know the cord does something and the wood does something else, but I always thought it was more like it just does, like asking why brooms fly." "Brooms fly because someone applied deliberate magical engineering to a medium that has natural resonance with controlled levitation charms. There's a whole field of study." He paused. "Sorry, that was a bit much." "No, Ron was grinning now slightly. "You're a bit strange, aren't you, in a good way?" "A good strange, probably," Harry agreed. They talked, or more accurately, Ron talked and Harry asked questions which amounted to the same thing. Ron had 6 siblings, had grown up in a house called the Burrow, which sounded to Harry like something from a storybook, had been playing Quidditch since he could sit on a broom, and had an opinion about every wizard chess opening that anyone had ever attempted. Harry listened with genuine interest to all of it. He asked about Quidditch rules, about wizarding chess strategy, about what it was like growing up always knowing you were magical, and Ron answered everything with the unself-conscious openness of someone who'd never had a reason to be guarded. It occurred to Harry, around the time Ron was describing a particularly memorable Christmas involving a garden gnome and a string of fairy lights, that he liked this person. Not in the assessed, calculated way he'd come to think of most human interaction, useful, neutral, potentially hostile, but actually liked him. The simple animal fact of it. Ron was funny and warm and honest, and he talked to Harry like Harry was just a person he'd sat down next to on a train, which was both accurate and somehow the most extraordinary thing that had happened to Harry all day. He was still considering this when the door slid open again. The girl with the bushy hair looked into the compartment with the specific alertness of someone conducting a search. "Have either of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Ron said. "Not recently," Harry said, which made both of them look at him. "Try the fourth compartment from the front on the left side. Something small was moving under the seat when I came past." The girl stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I noticed it." "You noticed a toad under a seat in a compartment you were walking past." "I notice things," Harry said mildly. She held his gaze for a moment, evaluating, then apparently decided that was an acceptable answer. "Right, well, I'm Hermione Granger, and if Neville's toad isn't there, I'll come back and we'll think again." "Harry Potter." The evaluating look again, quicker this time. "I know who you are, I've read about you." A beat. "About the historical event, I mean." Your parents, and I wasn't trying to be." "It's all right," Harry said. "I've read about it too. Come back after you find the toad." "I have a question about wizarding governance law," and Ron's been very diplomatic about not knowing the answer. "I didn't say I didn't know," Ron said. "You made a face." "What face?" "I didn't make a face." Hermione looked between them, and something softened slightly in her expression, the pleased recognition of someone who has found, unexpectedly, somewhere they might belong. "I'll be back," she said, and she was. She returned 12 minutes later with a relieved Neville and the toad, whose name was Trevor, and who seemed philosophically resigned to a life of being lost and found. Neville thanked Harry with the flustered gratitude of someone not used to things working out, accepted the empty seat beside Harry with visible relief, and then went approximately puce when Harry said hello properly and used his name. "People are going to do that the whole year," Ron told Neville in a helpful undertone. "The being affected by him. Best to push through it now." "I can hear you," Harry said. "I know I was saying it to both of you." Hermione, who had taken the seat beside Ron and opened one of the non-school books she'd brought with the contentment of someone settling in for a journey, glanced up. "It's not entirely unreasonable to be affected. You are technically quite famous. Notoriety isn't the same as worth," Harry said. "No," she agreed, and went back to her book, and Harry noticed that this answer had satisfied her in some way that most answers probably didn't, which told him something useful about Hermione Granger. They were about 2 hours into the journey, the landscape outside gone properly wild and dark and Scottish, when the compartment door slid open for the third time with the particular quality of someone who expected to find a different reaction to their entrance than they got. The blonde boy, 2 large companions at his shoulders. The expression of careful superiority, slightly thinner out here away from his father. "I heard Harry Potter was on the train," he said, looking at Harry with the direct assessment of someone who'd been told Harry was important and was working out whether that was a problem. "I'm Draco Malfoy." "I know," Harry said pleasantly. "Platform 9 3/4. Your father was wearing green robes." A flicker of something in Malfoy's expression, the surprise of being preempted. He recovered quickly. "You do well to choose your friends carefully," he said, and his gaze moved to Ron with a quality that Harry recognized immediately and disliked. "There are the right families and the others." Ron's ears went red. He opened his mouth. "Malfoy," Harry said, not unkindly, but in the tone he'd found over 2 years of careful practice was the most effective way of stopping a conversation from going somewhere unpleasant, quiet enough to require attention, clear enough to leave no interpretation. "I appreciate that you came to introduce yourself. I don't appreciate the editorial about my seatmates. So you can leave the second part out and we'll have a perfectly fine acquaintance going forward, or you can press the point and I'll ask you to leave." He paused. "Your call." Silence in the compartment. The 2 large companions shifted slightly. Ron was staring at Harry. Hermione had looked up from her book and was watching with an expression of careful attention. Malfoy looked at Harry for a long moment. Harry looked back without any particular hostility or heat, just patience, the way you'd look at an interesting problem. Something moved behind Malfoy's eyes. Not submission exactly, more like recalculation. He was intelligent enough, Harry noted, to read the room accurately. Fine, he said. He didn't say fine in the way that people say it when they're planning a later revenge. He said it in the way that people say it when they've encountered something they need to think about more. He looked at Harry for another beat, then nodded, a small, precise movement, and left, the two large boys shuffling out after him. Ron let out a breath. Blimey, how did you do that? I just told him the truth in a boring voice, Harry said. He listens when you do that, like visibly listened. People listen when you're not afraid of them, Harry said. He expected me to be nervous. When I wasn't, he didn't know which script to use. Neville, who had gone somewhat pink during the exchange, said in a quiet voice, I wish I could do that. You can, Harry said, and meant it, and by the look on Neville's face, this was not something he'd been told often. Hermione had her book open again but wasn't reading it. He could tell because her eyes weren't moving. How are you so certain about everything? She asked, and it wasn't a challenge exactly, more like a genuine inquiry from someone who ran on certainty herself and recognized the machinery of it in someone else. I'm not certain about everything, Harry said. I'm just not uncertain about myself. She thought about that. There's a difference. Significant one, he agreed. She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to reading, actually reading this time, and Harry looked out the window at the dark Scottish hills rolling past, and the stones were warm in their pouch against his hip, and somewhere ahead of them in the dark the castle waited, with its secrets and its warm cold spot and its hidden things. He was curious. He was genuinely, completely curious, and it felt wonderful. Hogwarts arrived the way truly magnificent things often did all at once, without warning, around a bend in the lake. Harry had been in the boats with Hagrid bellowing, no more'n 4 to a boat, and the water black and still on either side, Neville gripping the edge with white-knuckled determination, Ron looking up with his mouth slightly open, Hermione turned fully around to see as much as possible. And then the bend and the castle blazing on the hillside above them, every tower lit, its reflection unsteady in the dark water, enormous and old and frankly impossible, and the entire fleet of boats went briefly silent, because there was nothing to say about it that wouldn't sound like an understatement. Harry looked at it and felt through the soul stone, the castle itself, or not the castle exactly, but everything alive within it. Hundreds of people, students and teachers and ghosts registering as a strange dim flicker of something past adjacent. Owls and cats and a 3-headed dog in a 3rd-floor corridor that he made careful note of. And underneath all of it, deep in the bedrock of the place, the faint glow of ancient magic so thoroughly woven into the stone that distinguishing building from spell was probably impossible. He also felt the cold spot, clearer now. Definitely in the castle, definitely walking around in there on 2 legs, definitely aware that something was coming, that something was close. He filed it away. He could be patient. The boats landed and they were herded up through the entrance hall. Torches and high stone ceilings and the collective astonished silence of 40-odd 11-year-olds, to wait in an antechamber while Professor McGonagall, who arrived with the precise energy of someone who'd done this 40 times and wasn't going to let sentiment slow her down, explained the houses and the sorting. Harry listened and watched the other first years. He'd already read about the houses, had formed opinions about the system itself, both its value and its flaws, and was primarily interested in which one would claim him. He'd thought about it on the train. He suspected the answer would be complicated. The ghosts appeared from the wall to his left and caused the expected excitement. A boy named Seamus Finnegan nearly jumped into someone called Dean Thomas, and Neville made a sound that was more air than actual noise. Harry watched nearly headless Nick with genuine interest, the dead registering to his senses as something between a presence and an absence, which was philosophically interesting. McGonagall returned and led them out into the great hall. Harry had read about the ceiling, reading about a ceiling that had been bewitched to look like the night sky, and actually standing under it were different experiences. He looked up and saw stars, real stars, the actual sky above the enchanted stone, not a painting of it, and felt the simple animal pleasure of something being exactly as good as he'd hoped. He sat at the Gryffindor table eventually. He knew it would happen before the hat said it, because the hat had told him. The sorting hat was the most interesting object in the room, which was saying something given the competition. It was a dented, ancient-looking witch's hat, visibly sentient, and when it was placed on Harry's head it didn't speak into the hall. It spoke into his skull, quiet and intimate, with the dusty patience of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years. Well, it said, "This is new." Harry said nothing. He had the impression it could hear him think anyway. 4 of them would take you happily, the hat said. That's unusual. Normally I'm negotiating over 1 or 2. But you, Ravenclaw, would love your mind. Slytherin would love your ambition. Hufflepuff would love your loyalty, and you are loyal. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And Gryffindor, a pause. Gryffindor would love your absolute inability to back down from anything. I'm not brave, Harry thought. Being unafraid isn't the same as being brave. Isn't it? The hat said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. You're right about that, but you don't have fear to be absent from, which is something else again. You have another pause longer. You have the willingness to walk toward whatever is there because you'd rather know than not know. That's a kind of bravery too, a cold kind. But the best Gryffindors always had a little cold in them. I'll go where you put me, Harry thought. I know, the hat said, and it sounded almost amused, but you're not the type to go where you're put. You'll go where you decide. I'm just giving you the category. Then Gryffindor, Harry thought, because I want to keep an eye on the 3rd floor corridor and Gryffindor is nearest. The hat started laughing. He could feel it, a vibration against his skull, and then it shouted Gryffindor. To the hall and the red table erupted, and Harry took the hat off and handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who looked at him with an expression that was equal parts welcome and something more careful. He sat down. Ron dropped into the seat beside him 30 seconds later, looking slightly dazed. The hat had apparently not taken long at all. Hermione came next, after a sorting that lasted almost 5 minutes and left her with the brightness of someone who'd won an argument. Neville took about 3 minutes and arrived at the table with an expression of genuine shock that slowly, as people slapped him on the back and called his name, softened into something that looked like it might become happiness if given the chance. Harry looked up and down the length of the Great Hall. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy was already seated, looking across with the calculating attention of someone updating a file. At the staff table, the teachers were settling. Harry catalogued them by feel, going left to right. Warmth here, dry amusement there, one deep coil of nerves in a turbaned figure near the center who felt, to Harry's senses, like he was wearing his soul on the outside and someone else's soul on the inside. Harry looked at the turbaned professor for a long moment. The cold spot, right there, across the hall, eating roast chicken. He turned back to his plate, and the sorting was done, and the feast materialized from nothing. Another trick worth understanding later, and Ron was already talking about something involving roast potatoes, with the passionate sincerity that Ron brought to everything. And Hermione was asking Neville questions about herbology with the organized interest of someone who genuinely cared about his answers, and Harry ate and listened and thought and was, he realized, somewhere approaching content. He looked once more at the turbaned figure. The figure didn't look back. It was eating carefully and watching the room and reeking of fear, which was fascinating, because underneath the fear was something else, something ancient and cold and hungry that Harry had no name for yet, though he was beginning to form hypotheses. At the center of the staff table, Albus Dumbledore sat in his headmaster's chair with his long silver beard and his half-moon glasses and his expression of twinkling, ancient benevolence, and he was watching Harry. Harry met his gaze across the length of the Great Hall. Dumbledore smiled. It was warm and genuine, and also, Harry noted through the ambient sensitivity of the Mind Stone, just slightly calculating. The smile of someone who had been moving pieces toward an outcome for a very long time, and was now seeing one of the pieces arrive and checking whether it was still the piece he'd ordered. Harry smiled back, pleasantly, openly, informatively. Dumbledore's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A faint adjustment, like a man realizing a room he thought he knew had a door he hadn't noticed. Harry looked away first, but only because the roast potatoes were genuinely excellent and deserved attention. Later, much later, the feast cleared and the students moved and the prefects led the first years through the castle, moving staircases being the expected excitement, Neville's temporary vanishment through a trick step being less expected but ultimately fine, until they arrived at the portrait of the fat lady, who asked for the password and admitted them to the Gryffindor common room. It was warm in there. Red and gold and firelit, worn furniture and notice board, and the low hum of many people in a comfortable space. Harry stood in the entrance for a moment and let it register through every one of his senses, the warmth, the comfortable noise of it, the soul stone reading 24 people all relaxed and belonging. He thought of the mirror he'd see later in the year. He thought of the ordinary kitchen and the people who loved him. He thought, this is a beginning of something like that. He didn't say it out loud. He went and found his dormitory and unpacked his bag with the efficient precision he'd developed over 2 years of maintaining his own space in a house where no one would do it for him. His wand went on the nightstand. His books went in an orderly stack. The pouch with the stones went under his pillow. The dormitory had 5 beds, Ron was already in the one next to Harry's, attempting to get his owl to settle. Neville was arranging Trevor's tank with extreme care. Two other boys, Seamus Finnegan, who had introduced himself on the stairs with the energy of someone who considered the world a series of interesting things to try, and Dean Thomas, who had a West Ham poster inexplicably among his things, and caught Harry noticing it, and they had a brief, warm conversation about football that confirmed to Harry that Muggle-borns were definitely a net positive for Hogwarts, rounded out the room. Harry lay in his bed, the stones warm under his pillow, the sounds of the castle settling around him, deep old stone noises, the wind off the Scottish hills, the distant hoot of the owlery, and he thought about the turbaned professor eating roast chicken with something old and cold and hungry riding underneath his skin. He thought about the third-floor corridor and what the three-headed dog was guarding. He thought about Dumbledore's eyes adjusting. He thought about Ron's laugh, which was the sort of laugh that made other people want to say funnier things. He thought about Hermione arguing with herself while reading a charms textbook, which she'd produced from somewhere during the feast and consulted twice with the self-contained satisfaction of someone cross-referencing. He thought, this is going to be a good year. He thought, this is also going to be extremely complicated. Both of these things were true simultaneously. Harry had found, in 2 years of thinking about it, that most important things were. He fell asleep while the castle breathed around him, old and certain, and in the morning there would be lessons and professors and the careful architecture of a year of school, and he was genuinely, honestly looking forward to it. The stones glowed very faintly under the pillow, just enough to see by if anyone had been looking. Nobody was, not yet. Chapter 3. The weight of what he knows. The first week of classes established several things clearly. Professor Flitwick was delightful, a small man with the precise enthusiasm of someone who had loved his subject for decades and still found it genuinely surprising, who stood on a pile of books to see over his desk and didn't seem to think this required comment. Harry liked him immediately. The mechanics of charms were interesting in the way that all elegant systems were interesting, the wand movement creating a channel, the incantation providing structure to the intent, the two working together like syntax and grammar to produce meaning. He understood it theoretically from his first lesson and had Wingardium Leviosa on his third attempt, not because he was showing off, but because once he understood the principle, the execution was obvious. Flitwick noticed. He didn't make a production of it, which Harry appreciated. Professor Sprout taught herbology with dirt on her robes and a warmth for her plants that Harry found genuinely touching. Through the soul stone he could feel the vegetative hum of the greenhouse, green and slow and comfortable, and Sprout herself moved through it like someone in their favorite room. Neville came alive in there in a way Harry hadn't seen from him anywhere else, his hands certain and his voice steady when Sprout asked him questions, and Harry caught Sprout noticing it too, with the particular satisfaction of a teacher who has just found where a student keeps their confidence. Potions was Snape. Harry had prepared for Snape in the way he prepared for everything he knew was coming. He'd read everything available, formed expectations, then held them loosely to allow for surprise. He'd expected cold precision, academic rigor with a punitive edge, and strong favoritism toward Slytherin. He'd gotten all of that. What he hadn't expected was the quality of the man's intelligence, which was genuinely remarkable, the kind of mind that cut through problems sideways rather than head-on, that had built its expertise through obsessive depth rather than broad study. Under different circumstances, Harry thought, he might have been fascinating. Under current circumstances, he was looking at Harry like he intended to prove something. Potter, Snape said, about 10 minutes into the first lesson, having already worked his way through a rapid-fire series of questions that had silenced most of the class. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood? Harry looked up from the notes he'd been making. Draught of living death, one of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The combination is old. There are references to it in texts predating formal potions classification. A silence. Snape's expression didn't change, but something behind it adjusted. Where did you read that? The library at Hogwarts has a copy of most potent potions that predates the restricted section categorization. The front section is still freely available. The historical notes reference the draft. Harry paused. Should I not have looked at it? The library, Snape said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't sure whether this was satisfying or inconvenient, is available to all students. He moved on. He asked Harry 2 more questions over the course of the lesson, both of them harder, and Harry answered both. And by the end of it, Snape had settled into a watchful silence that was more interesting to Harry than the hostility would have been. After class, walking back up through the dungeons, Ron fell into step beside him. "He hates you," Ron said in the considering tone of someone delivering news, "but he also can't figure out how to hate you, which is really getting to him." "He doesn't hate me," Harry said. "He hated my father. I'm making it more complicated for him." Ron stared at him. "How do you know about his feelings about your father?" "I read Hogwarts, a history." "That's not in Hogwarts, a history." "People tell you things and how they say things," Harry said. "He said my father's name like it was something that gone off." Ron thought about this. "Right, yeah. Fair." He nearly walked into a suit of armor and swerved without breaking stride, which suggested he'd done this before. "Are you actually going to be better at potions than Hermione? Because she's going to have thoughts about that." "I'm going to be different," Harry said. "Better or worse probably depends on what you're measuring." As it turned out, they were approximately equal, which Hermione found acceptable. Harry knew this because she told him directly, with the clinical honesty of someone who'd evaluated the situation and reached a conclusion and saw no reason to dress it up. She also told him that his notes from the first lesson were more organized than hers, which was clearly costing her something to admit, and Harry said that her analysis of the potion-making process had 3 points he wished he'd thought of, which was true, and they looked at each other with the mutual recognition of two people who are going to spend a lot of time either collaborating or competing, and would both strongly prefer the former. History of Magic was Binns, who was a ghost and had apparently died at his desk and simply continued teaching without noticing, and whose lectures had the soporific quality of truly excellent anesthesia. Ron fell asleep in the 3rd minute. Neville lasted to about 8. Harry listened with genuine attention, because the information itself was interesting even if the delivery was an active hazard, and he took notes in the margins that were more interesting than the lecture, and slid them toward Hermione, who read them and added to them and slid them back, and they conducted a silent running commentary on the Goblin Wars for the full 40 minutes without Binns noticing. Defense Against the Dark Arts was last on the Thursday, and Harry had been thinking about it since the train. Quirrell arrived to the classroom with his stutter already deployed, his nervous effect fully operational, knocking papers off the edge of his desk in a way that managed to seem both accidental and practiced. He was wearing the turban, which Harry could now feel clearly in the confined space of the classroom, the wrongness of it pressed at the edges of Harry's senses like a splinter, specific and uncomfortable. The lesson itself was adequate. Quirrell knew his material, of course he did, Harry thought. He was carrying something with intimate familiarity with the dark arts, but delivered it with the specific quality of someone performing incompetence, which was almost more interesting to observe than genuine incompetence would have been. The stutter came and went in patterns that didn't quite line up with emotional stress, if you were watching for it. The clumsiness was never quite enough to be disabling. Harry sat in the front row and took careful notes and was entirely pleasant and asked one question, about the theoretical difference between a dark curse and a dark jinx, which was a question from genuine curiosity, and Quirrell answered it with 3 seconds of competent, unaffected clarity before remembering to stammer. Harry wrote down the answer without commenting on any of this. After class, walking across the grounds to herbology, Hermione said, "There's something off about Quirrell." "Yes," Harry said, "you noticed too. On the train, actually." She stopped walking. "On the train, before you'd met him. The train was going toward the castle." "He was in the castle." Harry kept walking. After a moment she caught up. "What did you notice?" he asked, because her observation would be different from his and he was curious how she'd gotten there. "The stutter is inconsistent. The affect doesn't match the actual quality of his explanations. She frowned. "He's performing something, but I don't know what or why." "Neither do I," Harry said, which was mostly true. He knew the what, presence, possession, something ancient and cold, using the man as a vehicle. He didn't know the why, not fully. He had a hypothesis about the Philosopher's Stone, but a hypothesis was not the same as knowledge, and Harry had a deep-rooted disinclination to act on incomplete information. Ron, who was walking on Harry's other side, said, "I thought he was just weird." "He is just weird," Harry said. "He's also something else." "Are you going to do something about it?" "Not yet," Harry said. "I'm going to watch." Ron accepted this with the equanimity he applied to most of Harry's statements. Harry had noticed, a gift for comfort with uncertainty. He didn't need things resolved to be easy in his own skin, which was rarer than people appreciated. The thing about having a fraction of precognition and a sense of spatial relationships that extended to the whole castle was that hiding places were difficult to maintain around Harry. The 3rd-floor corridor was forbidden by Dumbledore's opening feast announcement, which meant it was of immediate interest to approximately 40% of the student body, and Harry had a head start on all of them. He went on the second Friday night of term, at 2 in the morning, when the castle was as quiet as it ever got. He didn't need the invisibility cloak he didn't yet have. The Space Stone's spatial awareness extended to people. He could feel every waking person in the castle like a constellation, each one a warm point of light, and navigate between them without effort. He moved through the corridors not quickly but certainly, a boy in socks and pajamas, his wand in his hand more from habit than necessity. The third-floor corridor was locked. The lock took him approximately 4 seconds with a wandless variation on the unlocking charm he'd worked out in the first week, and then he was inside. The smell reached him before the sound did, animal and warm and very large. Then the sound, 3 sets of lungs breathing in the dark, massive and slow, and when he cast a quiet lumos, the light fell on 3 heads the size of boulders, each one attached to a body that took up most of the room's available floor space. The dog, Fluffy, he'd later learn, which was a beautiful name for something this enormous, had all 3 heads angled toward him. 6 eyes blinked. Harry looked at them. Through the soul stone, the dog was a warm, complicated knot of instinct and loyalty, and the particular loneliness of something large kept in a small space. Harry crouched down. "Hello," he said quietly. The middle head made a sound that might have been a growl and might have been something deciding whether a growl was necessary. Harry reached slowly into the pouch and took out one of the stones, the soul stone, which glowed faintly orange in the dark, and held it where the dog could see it, not as a weapon or a deterrent, more like an offering of vocabulary. "Look, this is what I am, here is something of mine." All 3 heads leaned forward, 3 enormous noses were. Then slowly the middle head dropped to the stone floor, and the left head followed, and the right head hesitated for 10 full seconds before also going down, and the massive tail, barely visible in the dim light, began a tentative, cautious movement that might have been a wag. "Good lad," Harry said softly. "I'm not here to take anything, I just want to see." He walked around the dog to the trapdoor it was sitting on. Not directly on, offset, so that a large body was nearby, but the actual door was accessible if you were quiet and careful, and had the goodwill of the animal in question. Harry crouched over the trapdoor and pressed his hand to it and felt downward with the space stone, mapping the drop in the space below it. A tunnel, a series of rooms, he suspected, and at the end of them, faint and distinct in particular, the warm glow of something that was simultaneously a stone and a concept, the compressed possibility of endless life, endless gold, sitting in a room that had been designed to protect it. He already knew, without looking, that the protection systems were clever. He already knew, equally, that none of them were built to account for him. He sat back on his heels and thought about what to do with that information. He could take it. The Philosopher's Stone was, objectively, safer in his possession than in a castle where someone with a fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard in living memory walking around under his turban was also in residence. He could have it in his hand in 20 minutes, but if he took it, Dumbledore would know immediately, probably within the hour. And he didn't have enough information yet about what Dumbledore would do with that knowledge, which meant he didn't have enough information to handle whatever came next. Acting without information was the kind of thing that felt decisive and usually wasn't. He stood up. The right head of the dog tracked him. "I'll come back," he told it. He felt through the soul stone that the dog understood this in the way dogs understood most things, not the words, but the tone and the intent underneath. It put its head back down. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the dark, turning things over. The chess match with Dumbledore happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. It wasn't called a chess match. It was called a brief meeting in the headmaster's office, and it was issued as a polite request via McGonagall, who delivered it with the specific expression of someone conveying a message they find personally interesting. Harry said he'd be there at 3 o'clock, which was when he'd been asked. He arrived at 2:58 because arriving early was a form of information. The office was extraordinary, circular, lined with portraits of previous headmasters who tracked him with painted eyes, instruments on tables spinning and measuring things Harry couldn't immediately identify, and Fawkes the Phoenix in his corner burning at the end of a cycle, scruffy and gray and small, but alive with a presence Harry felt clearly through the soul stone. He paused by the Phoenix briefly. The bird looked at him with one bright eye. Harry felt from it something very old and very calm, and held out a finger, and the Phoenix pressed its beak against it once before going back to its perch. "He doesn't do that with many people," Dumbledore said from behind his desk, where he was sitting with his hands folded and his expression warm and entirely attentive. "He's reading something," Harry said, sitting down in the offered chair. "I'm not sure what, nor am I after all these years." Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon glasses. "Tea, please." The tea appeared. It was very good tea. Harry suspected everything in this office was the best possible version of itself. He sipped it and waited and watched Dumbledore decide how to begin. "You are," Dumbledore said, "not what I expected. What did you expect?" "Something more." Dumbledore paused, and Harry appreciated the pause, which was genuine rather than theatrical. "More reactive. You've had a difficult childhood, Harry. The circumstances of your upbringing were not what I would have wished for you." "They were what they were," Harry said. "I made use of them." "Yes, that's precisely what I mean." Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was warm and direct, and also, Harry noted, categorizing. "You seem very settled for someone your age, very certain." "Is that a problem?" "It's unusual." "Unusual isn't a problem," Harry said. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "No, it isn't." He set down his own teacup. "I want to ask you something directly, Harry, and I hope you'll answer directly. What are those stones you carry?" Harry looked at him steadily. He'd known this was coming, not through the time stone, but through ordinary logic. Dumbledore was not a man to whom information failed to arrive. "Infinity Stones," Harry said. 6 of them. I found them near my aunt and uncle's house when I was 9. "Found them," Dumbledore repeated. "In a chamber under a construction site." Harry turned the leather pouch over in his hand without opening it. "They'd been there a long time. I don't know how long. I don't know how they got there. I've looked and I haven't found anything useful." "May I see them?" Harry considered it. Thought about the Space Stone, which would tell him immediately if Dumbledore attempted to move them. Thought about the Mind Stone, which was already reading the carefully controlled surface of Dumbledore's intent. Thought about the Soul Stone, which read deeper and found something he hadn't expected, not manipulation, not agenda. Genuine, real, uncomplicated curiosity. The actual feeling of a man who has encountered something he doesn't understand and wants to know what it is. Underneath that something else, a long familiar grief, complicated and old, the specific sorrow of someone who has been moving people like pieces for so long they've forgotten what it was like not to. Harry opened the pouch and laid the 6 stones on the desk between them. The office responded. The instruments on the tables went absolutely still. The portraits leaned forward. Fawkes lifted his tired head. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees and then came back, as if the air had taken a breath. Dumbledore looked at the stones for a long time without speaking. Harry watched him. Through the Mind Stone, he felt the shape of what Dumbledore was thinking, not the specific thoughts, but the architecture of them. Surprise, genuine and large. Recognition, the kind that comes when something you half suspected turns out to be more real than you'd let yourself believe. And beneath that, moving slowly like a deep current, worry. Not about himself, about Harry. "You've had these since you were 9, Dumbledore said quietly. "Yes, and you've used them." "I've learned them," Harry said. "There's a difference." He gathered the stones back into the pouch. "They're not weapons, Dumbledore. They're not something I point at things. They're more like they're mine. They work because I work. That makes them more powerful than weapons," Dumbledore said, "not less." "Yes," Harry agreed. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. "You're not afraid of that." "Power isn't what people should be afraid of," Harry said. "It's the absence of something to check it, character or conscience. People who are afraid of power just give it to someone else and pretend that's safer." He paused. "It more actions continue / next chapter chapter 4. Things that bleed in the dark. Halloween arrived the way it always did at Hogwarts, with decorations so thorough it suggested the castle itself had opinions about the holiday. Live bats in the corridors, carved pumpkins the size of small vehicles floating at the ceiling of the Great Hall. The smell of something warm and spiced moving through every room like the castle was cooking from the inside. Even Peeves seemed to have redirected his chaos into something almost festive, which mostly meant the chaos was louder and more orange than usual. Harry spent the morning in the library. He'd found a text 2 weeks ago, buried deep in a section of the restricted catalog that Madame Pince had let him access after he'd produced a note from Dumbledore that Dumbledore had given him without being asked, which Harry took as evidence of the new arrangement between them holding, that described soul fragment magic in terms specific enough to be useful. The theory was old and ugly and deeply illegal, and it confirmed the hypothesis Harry had been building since September. Horcruxes. The word sat in his mind like a stone in still water, everything rippling out from it. Not possession, worse than possession. A deliberate rending of the soul, a piece of it anchored to an object, the anchor keeping a person tethered to life past any natural limit. Voldemort had made one, possibly more. The fragment currently sharing Quirrell's skull was not Voldemort himself, it was something smaller and more desperate. A backup. A splinter of a man who had cut himself so thoroughly that his pieces no longer remembered being whole. Harry sat with this for a while, then he went to breakfast. The feast that evening was extraordinary in the way all Hogwarts feasts were extraordinary. More food than could reasonably be justified, served in a hall that looked like a genuinely excellent dream. Harry ate steadily and listened to Ron describe the precise tactical superiority of his approach to Halloween as a Weasley, which apparently involved a family tradition of competitive pumpkin carving that his father took more seriously than the children, and Fred and George took seriously in entirely the wrong direction. Hermione, halfway through a piece of tart, put down her fork and said, "I'm going to the bathroom," and left. Harry noted the specific quality of her departure, slightly too fast, face slightly too controlled, but said nothing and let her go. He knew she'd had trouble in charms. He'd felt it from across the room before he'd seen it, the hot flare of humiliation that she'd locked down immediately with practiced efficiency, the kind of efficiency that meant she'd needed it before. Flitwick had corrected her pronunciation in front of the class with the gentle matter-of-factness that teachers sometimes thought was kind and wasn't. Ron had made a comment under his breath that Hermione had overheard. It hadn't been vicious. Ron wasn't built for vicious, but it had been careless, and careless could sometimes land harder. He gave her 15 minutes. Then he looked at the time, thought about the last time he'd felt Quirrell's particular signature moving through the corridors, 20 minutes ago, heading downward, and said to Ron, "Come on." Ron looked up from a drumstick. "Come where? Hermione's been gone too long. She's upset, come on." Ron put the drumstick down. They slipped out of the Great Hall, which was still chaotic enough with Halloween enthusiasm that their absence took a while to register, and moved into the corridor. Harry felt Hermione through the soul stone before he heard her. Second-floor bathroom, the rightmost cubicle, a small tight knot of feeling that was mostly pride and mostly pain, and entirely alone with both. He also felt something else. Larger, moving with the particular inelegant momentum of a body being directed rather than inhabited, trollish, massive, wrong. Coming from the stairs at the end of the corridor, moving fast, Harry broke into a run. Behind him, Ron said, "What?" and then apparently saw or felt or simply understood that something was happening because he followed without asking more. The troll came around the corner at the end of the second-floor corridor with the dramatic entrance of something that had no idea it was dramatic. It was roughly 12 feet tall, gray-skinned, carrying a club that had probably once been a tree, and it smelled like every bad decision a body could make all at once. It blinked at Harry with the small, deeply unimpressed eyes of something that had evolved to hit things and didn't have time for alternatives. Harry stopped, looked at it. Ran a quick clinical evaluation. The troll was a mountain troll. He could tell by the size and the specific gray of its skin. Controlled, which was the concerning part. It had been pointed at something, and that something was, he was fairly certain, the bathroom 20 feet behind him. Which meant someone had pointed it here, which meant this was deliberate, which meant the feast and the distraction were. He turned to Ron. "Go tell a teacher, any teacher." "What are you going to?" "Go," Harry said, not unkindly but without space for negotiation, and Ron went because Ron trusted him, which Harry intended to prove warranted. He turned back to the troll. He genuinely considered his options. He could put it to sleep with something derived from the Mind Stone, which would work but would require him to reach into the thing's mind, and the inside of a troll's mind was probably its own kind of horrible. He could use the Space Stone and simply relocate the troll. Somewhere outside would be ideal, but moving 12 feet of mountain troll through space required either precision or acceptance that the landing would be messy, and somewhere outside in late October would raise questions he didn't want to answer. He could amplify a simple stunner to the point where it would actually stop something this large, or simplest, he could just deal with it. He raised his wand. "Wingardium Leviosa," he said, and the club went up, right out of the troll's fist, straight up, and then Harry held it at the ceiling for about half a second before letting it go, and 12 feet of mountain club came down on 12 feet of mountain troll from above. The troll fell like a building being demolished. The floor shook. Dust came off the ceiling in a sheet. Harry stepped backward, waited for the dust to settle, and looked at the troll lying face first in the corridor, making a sound like a foghorn in distress. "Ow," said Ron from somewhere behind him, which meant he'd come back or never left. The bathroom door opened. Hermione looked out at the corridor, at the troll, at the dust still floating in the air, at Harry. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. She stared at him for a moment. Her eyes were slightly red at the edges, which she was transparently pretending he hadn't noticed, and he was transparently pretending alongside her. "There's a troll," she said. "Yes, it's handled. She looked at the troll again, at the club on the floor. "You used Wingardium Leviosa." "I learned it 3 weeks ago," Harry said. "Turns out it scales." There was a long pause in which Hermione appeared to process several things simultaneously. The The troll, the method, the fact that Harry's robes didn't have a single speck of dust on them because he'd stepped back at exactly the right moment, and something else he suspected had to do with the fact that he'd come looking for her. "Ron," she said, looking past Harry, "did you know he was going to do that?" "I've learned not to ask," Ron said, which was the kind of thing he said that was funny on the surface and meant something more underneath, and Harry appreciated that about him. The teachers arrived 30 seconds later, McGonagall first, then Snape, then Quirrell trailing behind. Harry watched Quirrell over McGonagall's shoulder as she delivered a rapid assessment of the troll with the efficient alarm of someone who could be frightened and competent simultaneously. Quirrell was looking at the troll with the expression of someone whose plan had not worked. Underneath that, through Harry's ambient reading of the room, something much older than Quirrell experiencing something Harry needed to identify. It wasn't rage, it was calculation. An assessment, rapid and cold, of what this outcome meant and what the next move should be. Harry looked at Quirrell. Quirrell's eyes flickered to Harry and away, immediately, with the speed of someone who'd been doing something they knew they shouldn't. Harry filed away the exact quality of that flicker. McGonagall gave Hermione 5 points for presence of mind in a dangerous situation, which was generous given that Hermione had been in a bathroom crying. But Harry suspected McGonagall knew this and had decided presence of mind was wherever you found it, and took 5 from Harry and Ron for being out of the feast. Harry accepted this with equanimity. Ron accepted it with the specific expression of someone who thinks this is deeply unfair, but has also correctly assessed that now is not the time. Walking back to the common room, the three of them together, Hermione said quietly, "Thank you, both of you." "Of course," Harry said. "Ron came back for you," she said. "He didn't have to." Ron made a sound that might have been a denial and might have been the beginning of an explanation that he decided not to give. "Nobody should be alone when something horrible's coming," he said finally, and then looked mildly embarrassed at having said something that honest. Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Harry. Something settled in her face, not quite a decision, more the recognition of something that had already been decided without her having noticed. "I need to tell you both something," Harry said. They found a window seat in an empty corridor 1 floor up. Halloween sounds drifted up from below, the feast resuming, the drama of the troll already becoming story. Harry sat with his back to the wall and his knees up and the leather pouch in his hands, and he told them. He told them about the construction site and the chamber and the 9-year-old boy who'd run in from 4 boys who wanted to hurt him and found something impossible. He told them about 2 years of teaching himself in a house where nobody helped him, and what each stone did, and what they'd done for him and to him. He told them about Diagon Alley and Ollivander's face when the sparks came off the wand. He told them about the 3rd-floor corridor and the trapdoor in the Philosopher's Stone. He told them about Quirrell. He told them about Horcruxes. When he was done, the corridor was quiet for a while. Ron said, "When you said you were a bit strange on the train, I didn't say that, you said it." "Right, but I meant it more like interesting strange and less like," Ron gestured at the universe. "Less like whatever this actually is. Is it too much?" Harry asked. He'd considered this before telling them, the fact that this was, by any measure, an enormous quantity of reality to put on 2 people who'd known him for less than 2 months. But they'd earned the truth by being exactly who they were. He owed it to them. "No," Hermione said immediately, with the decisiveness of someone who'd made up her mind while he was still talking. "It's not too much, she pressed her lips together. "It explains a great deal, the spatial awareness. The way you knew where the troll was before we saw it, the fact that you're always slightly ahead of everything." She looked at the pouch. "Can I see them?" He opened the pouch and tipped the stones into his palm. 6 of them, glowing gently in the dim corridor, their colors warm and distinct. Hermione leaned forward. Her face in the colored light was intent and fascinated and not afraid at all. She reached out and held her hand near the yellow one, the Mind Stone, without touching it. "I can feel it," she said. "Something, it's like a hum." "It reads intent," Harry said. "It won't hurt you. None of them will if you're not trying to use them wrong." "Can anyone use them?" "I don't know, I don't think so. I think they recognize something specific, but I don't know what that something is yet." She pulled her hand back and looked at him. "The Horcrux theory, if Voldemort split his soul and if 1 piece is in Quirrell, how many pieces are there?" "I don't know," Harry said. "That's the part I can't work out from the text alone. The number depends on how far he went and how far a human soul can be divided before it stops functioning as a coherent entity. The book I found was theoretical. It didn't give numbers. There are other books," Hermione said, "older ones. I've seen references to texts on dark soul magic in the restricted catalog, the section Madame Pince keeps locked separately from the rest of the restricted section," Harry said. "I know. I need a stronger note from Dumbledore to get in there. I could write the essay, Hermione said, and then seemed surprised to have offered it. I mean, I could write an essay arguing for access to those texts on academic grounds. Madam Pince responds to well-structured academic argument better than to authority, I've noticed. Harry looked at her. That would be genuinely helpful. Good, she said, with the satisfaction of someone who likes having a task that matches their specific abilities. Ron had been quiet for a while, which with Ron meant he was processing something real. He looked at the stones, still in Harry's palm, settling back to their resting glow. Does it hurt? He asked, carrying them, being connected to them all the time. Harry thought about it. No, he said, it used to be loud. When I first found them, everything was very loud for a while. Now it's just, he considered the word, ambient, like having ears. You don't think about having ears, but you can hear everything, most things. Ron was quiet for another moment. Can you feel us right now? Yes, Harry said, not your thoughts, more like the shape of what you're feeling, the temperature of it. And Ron, Harry said, because the soul stone gave him this clearly, you're not afraid of me. You're worried about whether I need something, and you're trying to work out whether asking directly is better than waiting. He paused. The answer is that I'm fine, and asking directly is always better. Ron exhaled. Right, he said. Right, good, just you've been carrying this since you were 9 and nobody. He stopped. His voice had gone slightly tight, and he was looking at the stones with an expression that Harry needed a moment to categorize because it wasn't pity which he'd braced for. It was something older and more straightforward than pity. It was anger on his behalf. Harry had very few prior data points for what it felt like to have someone angry for him. He sat with it for a moment, turning it over. I'm all right, he said. I know, Ron said. I know you are. That's not you shouldn't have had to be all right alone, is all. Harry put the stones back in the pouch. Well, he said, I'm not anymore. This sat in the corridor between the three of them and was true in the way that simple true things are, plainly, without decoration. Hermione's shoulder touched Harry's. Ron stretched his long legs out in front of him and leaned his head back against the wall. Below them, the feast continued. Somewhere in the castle, Quirrell was revising his plan. Somewhere deep under the stone, the Philosopher's Stone sat in the dark and waited. Harry thought about the troll. About the fact that it had been deliberately directed toward this floor, toward this bathroom, on the one night when the entire student body was gathered conveniently in one place and the corridors were empty. He thought about what Quirrell had been doing while everyone watched the teachers handle the troll. He reached out with the space stone, soft and careful, mapping the castle, 3rd floor, the corridor, the locked door still locked, the trapdoor. Below the trapdoor, the stone was still there. Nothing had been touched. A test then, not an attempt. Quirrell had been testing the response time, the protocols, what happened when chaos was introduced, learning the patterns, planning something more serious for later. Harry filed this away and decided to let himself have this corridor, these two people, the ordinary warmth of having told the truth and not been dropped for it. Strategy could wait 20 minutes. Hermione, he said. She looked at him. Ron's comment in Charms wasn't meant the way it landed, he said. He knows, he's been working out how to say so. Ron sat up straight. Yeah, I have. That was, I shouldn't have said it and I should have said something sooner, and I'm saying it now. Hermione was quiet for a moment. It's not the first time someone said something like that. I know, Ron said. That's what made it worse when I thought about it. It's already been said to you before and he ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, I mean it. I know you do, Hermione said. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was evaluating and then slowly warmer. You're a lot more perceptive than you let on. I'm very perceptive, Ron said. I just don't perform it, Harry laughed. And then Hermione laughed, which she seemed slightly surprised by, and Ron looked pleased with himself in the uncomplicated way he did when something he'd said had landed right. They went back to the common room eventually, the three of them, and they were something different by the time they got there than they'd been when they left the feast. Harry wasn't sure there was a word for it, something that meant, I know the real shape of you and I'm staying anyway. That felt like enough for one Halloween. November came in hard and cold off the Scottish hills, rattling the windows of the castle and turning the grounds into something that required serious commitment. Harry found he liked it. The cold had a particular quality of clarity, the kind of weather that made everything feel more specific, more present. Quidditch started properly, and Harry went to watch practice because Ron was fascinated by it and had strong opinions, and Harry found that he enjoyed seeing things through Ron's eyes, which had a quality of enthusiasm that made whatever he was looking at more vivid. Oliver Wood ran drills with the fervor of someone for whom this was a genuine calling, and Harry tracked the movement of the quaffle through the air and thought about spatial dynamics and angle, which was what happened when you had the space stone's geometry running as background process. He watched the Slytherin practice the following week, because Malfoy was Slytherin's seeker, and Harry wanted to understand him properly. He'd been watching Malfoy all term, the way he watched everything he hadn't fully categorized. Malfoy was interesting in the way that contradictions were interesting, the performed confidence over the genuine anxiety, the sharp intelligence underneath the aristocratic affect, the moments when he forgot to perform and was just a sharp-faced 11-year-old who wanted very badly to be taken seriously. He'd kept Harry's advice from the train, Harry had noticed. Not ostentatiously, but the comments about Ron's family background that had characterized the early weeks had stopped, or at least stopped when Harry was present. Harry wasn't sure whether this represented actual revision or simply Malfoy's well-developed sense of strategic behavior, and he suspected Malfoy himself wasn't entirely sure either. On a Saturday in mid-November, Harry was walking back from the library when he nearly walked into Malfoy at the top of a staircase. Both of them stopped. They looked at each other for a moment. "Potter," Malfoy said. "Malfoy," Harry said. They fell into step alongside each other down the stairs in the particular way of people who don't have a plan but have agreed implicitly that they're going the same direction. Harry waited. "You let me walk away on the train," Malfoy said. "You walked away on your own," Harry said. "You made it easy. You made it possible," Harry said. "Those are different things." Malfoy was quiet for a turn of the stairs. "My father said you'd be." He paused, choosing words with the care of someone who hadn't decided how honest to be yet. He said the famous Harry Potter would be an ally or an obstacle, and that the important thing was to establish which early and act accordingly. "And which am I?" Malfoy looked at him. Harry looked back. Through the Mind Stone, there was something surface-level and calculating, and underneath, it's something that was just a person working out whether they could afford to be direct. "I don't know yet," Malfoy said. "That's honest," Harry said. "I respect it." "I'm not looking for your respect," Malfoy said, but there was less heat in it than there might have been in September. "I know," Harry said pleasantly. "You're looking for your own answer. I'm just telling you I won't mind what it is." Malfoy stopped at a corridor junction. Harry stopped alongside him. Malfoy looked at him with the specific expression of someone confronting something they don't have a category for. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People keep saying that," Harry said. "What were you expecting us to expect?" Harry thought about it genuinely. "Nothing specifically. I didn't plan myself around anyone else's expectations. I just am what I am." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and went left at the junction without another word, which was itself a kind of answer. Harry went right. He thought about Malfoy for the rest of the walk back to the common room, the complicated machinery of a person who'd been given a complete worldview from birth and was only now, out from under his father's direct eye, beginning to find its edges. He thought about what it must be like to have your path already planned for you, every choice prearranged. He thought that Draco Malfoy, under very different circumstances, might have been fascinating. He thought that under these circumstances, Malfoy might still turn out to be important. He wasn't sure which direction yet. The direct confrontation happened on a Thursday in late November, though confrontation was probably too strong a word for what it actually was. Harry went to defense against the dark arts a minute late on purpose, slipping into the back of the room while Quirrell was writing something on the board, and he sat and felt the room settle, and specifically felt Quirrell, close and clear. The wrongness of what was writing in that body pressing against Harry's senses, with the persistent discomfort of something that belonged in a different category of existence. They were doing a lesson on defensive theory, not practical. Quirrell hadn't had them practice anything practical, which was, Harry reflected, entirely reasonable from Quirrell's perspective. The killing curse was considerably less interesting if your target could dodge before you'd cast it. Harry took notes, answered when called on, said nothing unusual. After class, when the other students had filed out and Hermione had glanced at him with the question clearly on her face, and he'd nodded that it was fine and she'd gone, Harry stayed in his seat. Quirrell was at the board, erasing. He stopped, stiffened slightly without turning around with the specific quality of a person who has realized they're not alone and is working out what that means. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said pleasantly. Quirrell turned around, the turban, the stutter deployed immediately like a reflex. "Mr. Peapotter, is there something?" "I'm not going to say anything to anyone," Harry said. "About your situation, I want you to know that." Quirrell went very still. The stutter dropped, then came back, then dropped again, as if the two entities sharing the body couldn't agree on how to respond. Don't know what I know what you're carrying," Harry said. "I've known since September. I'm not afraid of it, and I'm not going to run to Dumbledore this afternoon. I just thought you should know that I know because it seems like the honest thing to do. another silence. Longer, heavier. The cold presence in Quirrell took over. Harry could feel the shift, Quirrell going slightly glassy-eyed, something else looking out of his face. "You know," said a voice that wasn't Quirrell's. It came from the wrong direction, from the back of Quirrell's head, muffled by the turban, which was a detail that raised several questions Harry's mind immediately cued for later. "And you're not afraid?" "No," Harry said. "Why?" The voice had the quality of something that hadn't spoken for a long time and was relearning how. Cold and specific, each word placed precisely, like someone walking carefully on uncertain ground. "Because you're not currently a significant threat," Harry said. "You're a fragment, less than a fraction. You've been without proper form for 10 years, and it's cost you significantly, and you're afraid, which I think you'll find is an interesting experience after a lifetime of inspiring fear in other people." He paused. "I'm not your enemy, specifically. I'm opposed to what you want to do with the stone, because Flamel's immortality being yours is a bad outcome for everyone. But I don't have any interest in making this personal." Silence. "You're 11 years old," the voice said. "Yes, and you," something that might have been a laugh except the emotion behind it was too complicated for a simple laugh. "You actually believe everything you just said." "Completely," Harry said. A long pause. The classroom had gone very cold, or maybe Harry was imagining it. He wasn't imagining it. The temperature had dropped 3 degrees while the fragment gathered itself, and he could feel the effort that took, the desperate scrape of something pulling on power it barely had. "The stones," the voice said. "They're yours, truly yours." "Yes. And you won't give them to me. Number, even if I asked. Especially if you asked," Harry said gently. "Because if you had them, you'd unmake things. Not out of evil, specifically. You'd probably tell yourself it was purpose, order, necessity. But you'd unmake things that shouldn't be unmade." He stood up and picked up his bag. "I know you're going to keep trying for the stone. I know I can't talk you out of that. I just wanted to be honest with you about where I stand." It felt right. He walked to the door. The voice said behind him, "You'll have to kill me eventually." Harry stopped. He considered it. "No," he said and meant it. "I'll have to stop you. That's different." He left. The corridor outside was empty. Harry walked toward lunch with his bag on his shoulder, and the stones warm at his hip, and the clear knowledge that he'd just had a conversation with the most feared dark wizard of the century, and it had felt primarily like a difficult but necessary truth told plainly. He felt through the mind stone the echo of Quirrell's classroom, the fragment processing what had just happened, finding it didn't fit any prior model, revising. He also felt the small, cold fact underneath all of it. The fragment was more desperate than it was showing. 10 years without form had done damage that the stone could reverse, but damage that was also pushing toward recklessness. Things that were running out of time made choices that things with unlimited time never would. He needed to move the timeline up. He went to lunch, ate, waited for Hermione and Ron and told them between spoonfuls of soup what had happened. Hermione put her spoon down completely. "You talked to it." To him, technically. Quirrell was in there too. Harry ate another spoon of soup. It was very good soup. "He knows I know. He knows I'm not running to authority. He also knows I'm not going to let him have the stone, so we've established parameters." "You established parameters," Ron said, in the tone of someone repeating words back to make sure they're real, with the Dark Lord living in the back of someone's head. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Something passed between them that Harry read through the Soul Stone as a shared, fond exasperation of the specific kind that people develop for someone they care about doing something extraordinary and acting as though it were routine. "We need to be ready to move," Harry said. "He's more desperate than he was a month ago. He'll try something serious before Christmas if he thinks he can." "And if he does," Ron said. "Then we deal with it," Harry said. "Together." Ron picked up his spoon again. Hermione picked up hers. The three of them ate soup in the warm noise of the great hall, and outside the window the grounds were iron gray and cold, and the castle was old and enormous and full of things that needed dealing with. Harry felt, very faintly and from far away, through the Soul Stone's background register of living things, something at the edge of its range, distant and cold and getting, by degrees, more desperate. He turned up the soup bowl to get the last of it and planned and ate, and let the warmth of the hall move through him, and was ready. Chapter 5. The Mirror and the Man. December came to Hogwarts the way winter came to old places, slowly and then all at once, snow arriving overnight and transforming the grounds into something from a painting, the lake going dark and still beneath a white sky, the castle's towers catching the cold light and throwing it back in long angles across the courtyards. The common room fire burned higher, and the windows fogged at the edges, and the whole building developed the particular warmth of a place that knows how to hold heat. Harry stood at his dormitory window on the first morning of December, and looked at the grounds and felt, through every available sense, the castle breathing around him. Students sleeping, the slow warm tide of unconsciousness punctuated by the quick bright sparks of early risers. Fawkes on his perch 3 floors up, cycling between grief and renewal with the quiet patience of something ancient. The 3-headed dog, all 3 mouths breathing in sync. Quirrell awake very early, the cold presence behind his eyes sharp and active and working on something. He got dressed and went downstairs. He'd been thinking about the mirror for 3 days. He'd found it 2 weeks ago, not accidentally, because very little happened to Harry accidentally anymore, but because the space stone had flagged a spatial anomaly on the 4th floor that turned out to be a room that shouldn't exist, or at least hadn't been in any architectural plan he'd been able to find. The room was long and dimly lit and smelled like a room that had been sealed and reopened, and the mirror stood at the far end of it like something that had been waiting. He hadn't looked into it. Not yet. He'd stood in front of it and kept his eyes on the frame, gold, ornate, with an inscription along the top that he'd read twice. Eris stra eruoit ube cafruoit on wosi. He decoded it in about 40 seconds. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He'd thought about what that might mean for someone with 6 infinity stones and a fairly comprehensive awareness of his own inner landscape, and he decided he needed to think about it more before looking. He'd been thinking about it. Now he was going to look. The 4th floor corridor at 5:30 in the morning was the emptiest Harry had ever felt a place be. Even through the soul stone's background register, it was just cold stone and distant sleeping, and the sound his own socks made on the floor. He found the door, which was unlocked because locks didn't mean much to the space stone, and went in. The room was as he'd left it. The mirror stood at the far end, its surface dark, its frame catching what little light came through the high, small windows. Harry walked toward it and stopped about 6 feet away and looked up, and saw, not what he'd expected. He'd prepared, in the way he prepared for everything, considered possibilities, ranked them by likelihood. He'd thought he might see himself with the stones fully realized, some maximized version of his own capability. He'd thought he might see his parents, which he'd braced for, though he knew their faces only from photographs, and felt the lack of that knowledge like a specific and particular shape of absence. He'd thought he might see something abstract, safety, freedom. He saw a kitchen. An ordinary kitchen, small and slightly cluttered, with morning light coming through a window over the sink and something on the stove producing steam, and a table with mismatched chairs, and on those chairs people. Not faces he fully recognized, though some of them were familiar in the sideways way that dreams were familiar. A woman with red hair who laughed at something someone had said, and her laugh was specific and warm enough that Harry felt it as a sound even though he couldn't hear it. A man with glasses and dark hair who looked up from whatever he was reading, and the tilt of his head and the set of his shoulders was something Harry had only ever seen in mirrors. And around the table, others, Ron, with more years on him, broad-shouldered and relaxed. Hermione older, her hair exactly as it was now because some things were true at any age. Other people he didn't fully know yet, faces he'd meet maybe in time. And himself sitting in one of the mismatched chairs, with a cup of something warm in both hands and no particular expression, except the uncomplicated one of someone who is exactly where they're supposed to be. Harry looked at it for a long time. He'd spent 2 years becoming someone that Privet Drive couldn't touch. He'd done it well. He'd found power and applied intelligence to it and built himself into something that looked, from the outside, completely settled. And he was settled, he genuinely was. The stones were part of him, and he understood himself, and he was not afraid of the dark, or the castle, or the fragment of evil currently sleeping in a professor's skull 3 floors down. But the mirror showed him an ordinary kitchen and people around a table, and he felt something move in his chest that he didn't have a clean name for. Not grief, exactly, something adjacent to it. The specific feeling of wanting something you didn't know you wanted until you saw it, and then recognizing that you've wanted it the whole time without ever letting yourself notice. He stood with it. He didn't look away, and he didn't minimize it, and he didn't do what he might have done 2 years ago, which was lock it somewhere small and quiet and manageable. He just let it be there, the feeling, big and true and a little unwieldy. It is rather arresting, isn't it? Harry didn't startle. He'd felt Dumbledore coming, had known from the moment the headmaster's distinctive signature had appeared at the corridor door, warm and complicated and older than anything in the castle except the stones themselves. He'd had enough warning to decide not to move. Yes, he said. Dumbledore came to stand beside him, not too close, looking at the mirror with an expression Harry couldn't see from this angle. They stood together in the dim room for a moment. "What do you see?" Dumbledore asked. His voice was quiet, not the careful, arranged warmth of the headmaster's office, something more unguarded. "A kitchen," Harry said, Morning, people I love, not power. Number, he looked at the mirror. The stones already showed me what I could do. That's not the thing I didn't know I wanted. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The happiest man on earth would look in this mirror and see himself exactly as he is. I know, Harry said. I read the inscription. A beat. What do you see? He wasn't sure Dumbledore would answer. The question sat between them for long enough that it might not be answered. Then, my sister, Dumbledore said, alive. My brother and I not estranged from him, and myself younger, before certain choices. He paused. Before I decided that the greater good was a good enough reason for the things I did. Harry looked at him then. Dumbledore was looking at the mirror with an expression that was stripped of the arrangement, the warmth, the calculation. Just an old man looking at something he couldn't have. What did you do? Harry asked, not accusingly, simply. I convinced myself, Dumbledore said, that intelligence was the same as wisdom, that because I could see further than others, my choices for them were better than their own. He paused. My sister died because of it, indirectly. I've had 50 years to debate the degree of my culpability, and the debate has never resolved. He looked away from the mirror. I was going to do it again with you. I know, Harry said. I know you know, Dumbledore said. That's yes, I know. He exhaled, long and quiet. This mirror should be moved. It's dangerous for anyone who doesn't know what they're looking at. Especially someone who does know, Harry said. Knowing what you're looking at doesn't make it less compelling. It just makes you more aware of what you're losing by standing here. Dumbledore looked at him. When did you become quite so old? Harry said. I was going to say clear-eyed. I had time and solitude and more information than was probably appropriate for a 9-year-old, Harry said. And I read a lot. He glanced at the mirror once more, the kitchen, the warm cup, the people around the table, and then looked away cleanly, a decision made. Move it somewhere he can't accidentally find it. Quirrell, he's getting desperate. I've been watching, Dumbledore said. I've been watching him more carefully since our conversation in October. He's going to move before Christmas, Harry said. I don't know which night, but it'll be soon. He's been mapping the response patterns for weeks. And when he does, Harry thought about the trapdoor and the rooms below, and the stones sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to come and take it. He thought about Quirrell's desperation and the cold fragment at the back of his skull growing more reckless as time compressed. He thought about the mirror and the kitchen and the people around the table. When he does, Harry said, I'll be there. It happened on a Wednesday. Harry knew before he went to bed that Wednesday was the night, not from the time Stone's fractional awareness, which only gave him seconds, but from the full accumulation of information gathered over months. Quirrell's pattern had changed that morning. He'd been calmer, not settled exactly. The desperation was still there, running like a current, but the quality of it had shifted from planning to resolve. He'd stopped mapping and started moving. Harry told Ron and Hermione at dinner. Tonight, Hermione said, not quite a question. After midnight, Harry said, he'll want the castle fully asleep. Ron put down his fork. Right, he said. So what's the plan? You two aren't coming, Harry said. They both looked at him. Harry, Hermione started. Quirrell is carrying a fragment of Voldemort, Harry said. Quirrell's magic alone is considerable. He's been teaching defense for a reason. He knows what he's doing. Whatever is sharing his body adds something to that which I don't have a complete picture of. This is not something I want either of you near. We're not asking permission, Ron said, with the pleasant firmness of someone who has thought about this and decided. We know what's down there, Hermione said. We've been reading about the protections for 2 months. And Harry, she met his eyes. You came looking for me on Halloween. You didn't ask whether I wanted to be there for that. Harry looked at them. He read them through the soul stone, Ron's determined warmth, the specific quality of his loyalty which was not passive but active, a choice remade constantly. Hermione's fear real and present and subordinated completely to her resolution, the way you subordinated a feeling when the principle underneath it was more important than the feeling. If I tell you to get out, Harry said, you get out, immediately, no argument. Agreed, Hermione said. Ron said. Yeah, all right. Get your things, Harry said. Meet me by the portrait hole at midnight. Bring your wands. He watched them go, Hermione back to the common room immediately, probably to reread her notes, Ron to finish eating because Ron's relationship with practical preparation involved carbohydrates, and he sat alone at the end of the table and thought about what came next. He thought about the conversation in the defense classroom. You'll have to kill me eventually. He thought about what he'd said back. I'll have to stop you. That's different. He thought about whether he'd been telling the truth or telling a story. He'd been telling the truth. He believed it. The distinction between stopping and killing was real. even when the thing being stopped was something ancient and cold that had unmade families and taken childhoods and left a particular shaped hole in the world where two people called Lily and James Potter should have been. He thought about the kitchen in the mirror. He had 7 hours. He went to the library. Midnight came up cold and quiet. Harry felt Ron and Hermione before he reached the portrait hole, both of them awake and alert, Ron with his wand already out, Hermione with 2 books under her arm that she put back when she saw Harry's expression, and then, after a moment's internal debate, kept the smaller one. They moved through the castle in Harry's bubble of spatial awareness, flowing around every waking person with a precision that Hermione found visibly impressive, and Ron had stopped visibly reacting to because he'd accepted it weeks ago. Harry kept one part of his attention on Quirrell, felt him, 3 floors below and moving, the cold presence clear and purposeful, the 3rd floor corridor, the locked door open. The dog, Fluffy, was awake, all 3 heads alert, tracking their entrance. Harry crouched immediately, the soul stone warm in his palm and the communication he'd established in September. "I know you, I'm not a threat, I told you I'd come back," reopened in the wordless way it always did, and the massive tail moved once and then the middle head went down. "How are you doing that?" Ron whispered. "Ask me later," Harry said. He moved to the trapdoor and lifted it. Below, a long dark drop into something soft, he could feel it, the devil's snare, aware of them already, its vegetative hum distinctive and slightly predatory. "The plant at the bottom tries to bind you," he said quietly. "Don't struggle, trust the light." He lit his wand, a real light, warm and deliberate, and dropped through. The plant came up fast, tendrils finding his limbs, but Harry had the space stone and the plant had no experience with someone who could simply be somewhere else. So he stepped through its grip and out the other side before it could properly close, and caught Hermione as she dropped, his light clearing the snare away from her immediately, and then Ron, who struggled for exactly 3 seconds before Hermione hit it with a wandless burst of light that she'd apparently improvised on the way down, and that Harry noted as impressive. "Flammable," Hermione said, a little breathless. "Devil's snare is fatally averse to light and heat. I read about it." "You read about everything," Ron said, pulling a last tendril off his ankle. "Someone has to," she said, and Harry caught her half-smile in the light of his wand. They moved through the rooms. Flying keys, which Harry declined to handle the intended way, the space stone found the right one in 4 seconds, plucking it from the swarm with a precision that made the enchantment seem almost poignant in its inadequacy. The chess game, and here Ron stopped them. "I can do this," he said, looking at the board that took up the entire next room, pieces taller than they were, the black side arranged and waiting. "This is chess." "I can do this." Harry looked at the board, looked at Ron, felt through the mind stone the shape of Ron's thinking, tactical, fast, the specific quality of a mind that had spent years calculating 3-dimensional movement across a grid. "It's your call," he said. "Entirely." Ron studied the board for about 45 seconds. Then he started moving pieces with the confident shorthand of someone who's been playing this game since before they could spell it, positioning, redirecting, seeing 4 moves ahead and then 5, and Harry and Hermione watched and didn't speak because Ron didn't need anything from them except the space to do what he did. Check in 6 moves. The white king tip. The pieces cleared the path. "Go," Ron said. He looked fine, bright-eyed actually, the way he looked when chess went well. "I'm fine." This was "I'm fine." "We know," Hermione said, and she touched his arm once briefly and they moved on. The troll in the next room was already unconscious. Harry paused over this fact for a second longer than might have seemed necessary, because whoever had come this way before them had handled it and not come back, which meant they were ahead, which meant Quirrell had already. "He's past the last room," Harry said. "Move." The final obstacle, the potions room, Hermione handled in 30 seconds flat, reading the logic of the puzzle with the rapid, decisive intelligence of someone for whom this kind of problem was a gift rather than a barrier. She handed Harry the correct potion without ceremony. "Go," she said. He went. The last room was lit with a cold purple fire that threw everything into sharp, unnatural clarity. The Mirror of Eris stood at the far end, moved here since Harry had last seen it, positioned with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd thought about this for a long time, and in front of it Quirrell. He turned when Harry entered. The stutter was completely gone. His face had the quality of someone who has finally stopped performing and found the experience of being himself interesting. "Harry Potter," he said. "Quirrell," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. Quirrell had been staring into it, and his expression had the specific frustration of someone who is not getting the answer they came for. "It shows you what you want," Harry said, "not how to get it." "I'm aware," Quirrell said tightly. "The old man's trap." He turned fully toward Harry. He thought you'd be the one to find it. That only someone who wanted to find it but not use it could get the stone from the mirror. He tilted his head. He built the whole thing around you. I know, Harry said, and yet you're here. Yes. Then get the stone, Quirrell said, and his voice dropped into something that wasn't quite a command and wasn't quite a request, the voice of something accustomed to being obeyed, relearning the vocabulary of desperation. Get it and give it to me. I'll let you walk away. I'll let your friends walk away. Whatever you want, power, knowledge, your parents. My parents are dead, Harry said. The stone doesn't change what's dead, it extends what's living. He paused, and I don't want power or knowledge from you. I already have both. Quirrell's expression shifted. Something moved behind his eyes, the handover of control, the fragment coming to the front with the particular quality of something that has run out of patience, and patience was all that was keeping it from being exactly what it was. Then we do this the other way, said the voice that wasn't Quirrell's. Quirrell's wand came up and the first curse came fast, not the killing curse, which told Harry that whatever the fragment was capable of right now was still constrained by Quirrell's body and power, but something old and dark that Harry had read about and felt instinctively before it arrived. He stepped sideways through the space stone and the curse hit the wall behind him and left a mark in the stone that smoked. You're faster than you should be, the voice said. I know, Harry said. He raised his own wand because he was curious how this felt with the power stone behind it. The shield charm came out of him like a pressure wave, not a gentle magical barrier, something that took up the full width of the room and pressed outward, and Quirrell actually staggered, which was interesting. Then Quirrell cast something that split the air sideways, and Harry felt it through the time stone 2 seconds before it arrived, and used the reality stone to make the space where he'd been standing slightly more than it appeared to be, which meant the curse passed through empty air wearing his shape like a coat and hit nothing. Quirrell made a sound of genuine frustration that was, Harry noted, Quirrell's sound rather than the fragments. Stop, said the voice. Quirrell went still. The full attention of the fragment forward now, cold and specific as a scalpel, stopped playing with him. Harry felt the temperature in the room drop. Felt the fragment pulling on something raw and desperate, the magical equivalent of bleeding out and using the blood to cast. He felt it the way he felt everything through the soul stone, and what he felt was not power. It was extremity, the frantic strength of something genuinely running out of options. I need you to listen to me, Harry said, and he said it to the fragment directly because the fragment was the one making decisions right now. Not for long, just for a moment. Give me the stone, the voice said. Think about what you're doing, Harry said. Not strategically. Actually think. You've been a fragment for 10 years. You've been sharing a human body for almost 2, and that body is being destroyed by it. Quirrell is dying, you know that. Silence. If you get the stone, Harry said, what then? You reconstruct yourself. You build power. You come back, and then what? You already tried this once. You had everything you're trying to get back, and you still, he chose the word carefully, fell. Something stopped you that you still don't fully understand. You've been so focused on recovery that you haven't thought about that. Your mother's sacrifice, the voice said, cold, controlled, old magic. I underestimated it. Did you understand it? A pause, the first real one. Do you? Harry pressed. Because I've thought about it a great deal. The specific magic that stopped the killing curse. The fact that my mother's death created a protection strong enough to reflect the most feared curse in the world. The fact that you've had 10 years to think about this, and you're still trying the same approach. More power, more control, more life. And it hasn't occurred to you that the thing that stopped you is categorically different from anything you've ever understood. The temperature in the room was very cold now. But Quirrell wasn't moving. What's your point? The voice said. Love is not a strategy to you, Harry said. It never has been. It's always been a vulnerability, something other people had that made them weak, but it stopped you. It's the one thing that actually, genuinely stopped you, and you're going to spend another lifetime chasing power and you still won't understand it, and sooner or later you'll try to kill someone who's loved and it'll stop you again. He looked at Quirrell's face, at the fragment looking out of it. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the truest thing I know, and I've been honest with you every time I've talked to you, and I don't intend to stop now. A very long silence. Then, quietly, the voice said, You are the most irritating child I have ever encountered. I've been told, Harry said, and you genuinely think something moved in Quirrell's face. You genuinely think talking to me is an option. I think it was worth trying, Harry said. I don't think it worked. No, said the voice. And then very fast, Quirrell's hand closed on Harry's wrist. The pain was immediate and extraordinary, not like anything he'd felt before, searing and specific, as if his skin were rejecting something at the deepest level. He'd read about this, the peculiarity of Quirrell's touch, the way a body that hosted something so antithetical to love burned against skin that had been protected by it. Harry's mother's sacrifice. Still active, still present, still real. He felt Quirrell screaming, not the fragment Quirrell, the actual human man underneath all of it, who was being destroyed from the inside and knew it and was terrified and exhausted, and had been terrified and exhausted for 2 years and couldn't find a way out. Harry acted on instinct, not on strategy, not on planning, on what the Soul Stone showed him, which was the genuine agony of a human being used as a container past the point of endurance. He put his free hand on Quirrell's face. The Power Stone amplified it. The Soul Stone directed it. The connection it made was to Quirrell specifically, to the human underneath, to what was left of him. And what Harry pushed through was not a curse or a spell, but the same love that had stopped the killing curse 15 years ago, because love was the thing that lived in the stones alongside everything else. And Harry had lived alone and unloved in a cupboard under a staircase for 9 years, and had found 6 stones, and taught himself everything and somehow, inexplicably, had ended up with more love than he knew what to do with. Love for Ron, who was upstairs waiting, and Hermione, who'd pressed her shoulder against his in a dark corridor, and Neville, who'd looked surprised every time someone was kind to him, and Hagrid, who'd brought ice cream and called him Harry, and even Dumbledore, complicated and human and trying. Quirrell burned, the fragment, facing something it fundamentally could not coexist with, could not strategize against, could not overpower, did the only thing it had left to do. It fled. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him because he was a person and he was falling and Harry was there, and lowered him to the floor, and the fragment was gone, dispersed, scattered, nothing left in the room of it except the lingering cold that was already warming. Harry sat on the stone floor next to Quirrell and waited. Quirrell's eyes were open. He looked at the ceiling with an expression of someone who had not expected to be able to look at anything at all. "Is it?" he started. "Gone," Harry said. Quirrell closed his eyes. The sound he made was not a word. Harry sat with him in the cooling room and waited, because there was nothing else to do, and because Quirrell had been afraid and in pain for 2 years and deserved someone to sit with him while he worked out what it felt like to just be one person again. After a while, Harry remembered the mirror. He stood and walked to it and looked into it properly for the first time tonight. The stone fell out of his pocket. Not out of the mirror, out of his actual pocket, appearing from nothing, which was a clever piece of enchantment that told Harry a great deal about Dumbledore's understanding of the Arist effect and its application to practical magical security. He picked it up, turned it over. A small red stone, warm and ordinary-looking, with the compressed concept of immortality sitting inside it like a held breath. He put it in his pocket. He went back to Quirrell. "Can you walk?" "I think so," Quirrell said. He sounded like himself, whatever himself was, under everything that had been on top of it, shaken and quiet and alive. "Come on," Harry said and helped him up. They went back through the rooms. Hermione was at the doorway of the potions room, her face doing the thing it did when she was frightened and was processing the fear intellectually to keep it manageable. When she saw Harry, she exhaled, and when she saw Quirrell, she reassembled her expression into something more careful. "He's all right," Harry said. "It's gone." She looked at Quirrell. Something moved in her face, the complicated recalibration of someone who came in ready to categorize a monster and is being asked to see a person instead. She handed Quirrell her smaller book without a word. He looked at it, confused. "You look like you need something to hold," she said simply, and walked ahead. Ron was exactly where Harry had left him, sitting on the chessboard with his legs dangling over the side of a rook, perfectly composed. He took one look at Harry and at Quirrell and at the particular quality of everyone's expressions and said, "Is it over?" "Mostly," Harry said. "The stone," Harry patted his pocket. Ron looked at the ceiling. "Right," he said. "Good." He slid off the rook. "Dumbledore's going to have some thoughts." "Probably," Harry agreed. "Let's go find out what they are." Chapter 6, The Shape of What Comes Next. Dumbledore arrived at the top of the trapdoor, 12 minutes after Harry sent Fawkes a thought. He hadn't sent a message through any conventional channel. No letter, no patronus, no intermediary. He'd simply directed a thought at the Phoenix through the Soul Stone's connection to living things, specific and clear. "Come get your person, we need him down here." 11 minutes and 40 seconds later, he'd heard the distinctive sound of Phoenix song in the corridor above, and then Dumbledore's footsteps, and then the headmaster dropped through the trapdoor with considerably more grace than his age suggested, landing lightly and taking in the room, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Quirrell sitting against the wall with Hermione's book in his lap, in a single sweeping look. His eyes landed on Quirrell and stayed there. "Phileas," he said, which was apparently the beginning of a thought he then reorganized. He looked at Harry. "The fragment, gone, Harry said. Dispersed. I don't think it'll reconstitute from that state. It barely had enough coherence to function as it was. He paused. I have the stone. I know, Dumbledore said. It was your pocket it appeared in after all. A silence settled. Ron was looking between Harry and Dumbledore with the alert attention of someone watching a match and tracking the score. Hermione had her arms folded, her expression the particular one she wore when she had questions she was organizing into order of priority. Dumbledore crossed to Quirrell and crouched beside him, moving carefully with the attentiveness of a man who had expected to find something worse than this. He looked at Quirrell's face for a long moment. Quirrell looked back with the slightly dazed quality of someone getting used to the sound of their own thoughts without company. Queerness, Dumbledore said quietly. How much of it was choice? The beginning of it, Quirrell said. He sounded tired down to the marrow. I was curious. I sought him out. After that, he stopped. After that, choice is the wrong word for it. Dumbledore nodded once. He stood, and his face when he turned back to Harry had the open quality that Harry had first seen in the mirror room, the expression underneath the arrangement. He needs the hospital wing, and Poppy will need. I'll explain it to Madame Pomfrey, Harry said. Or you can, either way. He looked at Quirrell. Can you manage the stairs? Yes, Quirrell said and got up and managed them. They went up through the corridor in a strange processional, Quirrell first, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone relearning their own gravity, Dumbledore close behind him. Then Harry, then Ron and Hermione, who had fallen into a quiet conversation with the low, tired voices of people who have been through something and are only now beginning to process it. Harry listened to them without meaning to, Ron saying something about the chess room, Hermione saying something back that made Ron laugh quietly, and felt, through the soul stone, the warmth of both of them, solid and continuous. The castle at 2 in the morning had a specific quality of stillness that Harry had learned over the course of the year. Not empty, never empty, not with this many people sleeping in it, but hushed in a way that made everything feel slightly larger than it was. Their footsteps echoed and the torches burned low, and the portraits slept in their frames, and Harry walked through it and thought about the stone in his pocket, and the cold absence where the fragment had been, and the image of Quirrell's face when the thing had left him, the specific expression of someone surfacing. Madame Pomfrey admitted them to the hospital wing with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the hour or the state of the people brought to her, took one look at Quirrell, and directed him to a bed with the firm competence that Harry found deeply reassuring in medical personnel. She asked 2 questions about what had happened, the important clinical ones, and Harry answered them plainly, and she accepted the answers without editorializing, which he also appreciated. She looked at Harry's wrist where Quirrell had grabbed him. The skin there was burned in the shape of a handprint, which he hadn't looked at properly yet. She put something on it that was cold and smelled like copper and mint, and the pain that he'd been managing with the Power Stone's passive amplification of his own endurance reduced to something much more ordinary. Sit, she told him, gesturing at a bed. I'm fine, he said. You've been in a dungeon confronting dark magic, and your wrist is burned through 3 layers of skin, she said. Sit, he sat. Ron dropped into the chair beside him immediately, with the practiced ease of someone who had decided this was his post and didn't need to announce it. Hermione sat on the edge of the next bed and looked at Harry's wrist with an expression that was clinical on the surface and something else underneath. Does it hurt? She asked. Less now, he said. Good, she said, which contained several things she'd apparently decided not to expand on. Dumbledore settled in the chair on Harry's other side. It was a small chair, and he was a tall man, and the overall effect was slightly undignified, which Harry thought he accepted with good grace. He folded his hands on his knees and looked at Harry with the full attention of someone who has made a decision about how to be in a conversation. I owe you several things, Dumbledore said. You don't, Harry said. We agreed to be honest with each other. You have been. I've been more honest than I planned to be, Dumbledore said, which was itself honest, and less honest than I should have been in some respects. He glanced at Ron and Hermione. This is a conversation that can wait until morning if they stay, Harry said, not aggressively, simply. They were down there with me. They've earned whatever conversation comes next. Ron said nothing, but Harry felt the warmth of it through the soul stone, the quiet thing that happened in someone's chest when they're included without having to ask. Dumbledore looked at them both, then nodded. Very well, he turned back to Harry. The stone. Harry reached into his pocket and took it out. It sat in his palm, small and red and warm, looking entirely ordinary. He set it on the blanket between them. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. It goes back to him. That was always the plan. It was, Dumbledore agreed, though he paused. The circumstances have changed somewhat. The protections here were breached or would have been breached without your intervention. I had planned to move it after the year's end. I will move it now. He looked at the stone. There is also the question of what Flamel decides to do with it, given that the primary threat driving this situation has now been, he searched for the word. Dispersed, Harry said again. Though not destroyed, I want to be clear about that. The fragment I dealt with tonight was a piece of something, and I don't know how many pieces there are. The room went quiet. Hermione said carefully, the Horcrux theory. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him very steadily. You know about Horcruxes. I found a text in November, Harry said. Hermione found 2 more last week. The theory is fairly internally consistent. He met Dumbledore's eyes. How many are there? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that had the quality of something being weighed. Then, I believe 7 was his intent. Including tonight's fragment, I have confirmed 2. The others, he exhaled. The others are something I have been working on for years without complete resolution. Tell me what you know, Harry said. Not what you think I need to know, what you actually know. A longer pause. Hermione's quill was out, Harry noticed, appearing from somewhere. She'd apparently decided that whatever Dumbledore said next was going into writing, because some instincts couldn't be overridden. Dumbledore told them. Not everything, there were honest gaps, things he genuinely didn't know, but the architecture of what he'd worked out over decades of careful investigation. Objects, possible hiding places, the specific dark logic of Voldemort's choices, which Dumbledore laid out with the analytical precision of someone who had spent a lifetime thinking about how a brilliant and broken mind worked. Harry listened. He asked 3 questions, each one going somewhere Dumbledore hadn't arrived at yet, and watched Dumbledore notice this and update accordingly. Ron asked one question that was practically straightforward and cut through the theoretical framing in a way that Harry appreciated. Hermione wrote steadily, her expression concentrated, occasionally asking for clarification of a term or a date with the focused efficiency of someone building a comprehensive record. By the end of it, the sky outside the hospital wing windows was beginning to light, the specific gray of early morning before color returned to the world. Dumbledore picked up the stone from the blanket and held it. This, he said, I will send to Nicholas tonight. He looked at Harry. And I will ask him to destroy it, regardless of what that means for him and for Perenelle. He paused. It is time to stop extending lives past their natural end in the name of work still to be done. I have my own thoughts about that particular rationalization. He'll resist, Harry said. He will, but Nicholas has always been a sensible man underneath the very long life. Dumbledore pocketed the stone. The argument I intend to make is that the most meaningful thing he can do with his remaining time is surrender the instrument that has defined it. He looked at the window. We shall see if he agrees. Tell him, Harry said, that the protection it was providing is gone. Whatever he was willing to let others risk to keep it safe, those people are still taking those risks, but the thing they're protecting no longer needs protecting. That changes the accounting. Dumbledore looked at him. That's a persuasive argument. I know, Harry said. That's why I'm giving it to you instead of going myself. Ron made a sound that was mostly suppressed laughter. Hermione did not suppress hers quite as thoroughly. Dumbledore looked at the 3 of them with the expression Harry had first identified as the complicated relief of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time. It was clearer now than it had been in the mirror room, more resolved. Harry, he said. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that the answer will genuinely not change anything. My commitment to honest dealing with you, my commitment to not using you as an instrument, any of it. I'm asking out of, he paused, curiosity, and some small personal need to understand. Ask, Harry said. Why did you come down here tonight? You knew the danger. You have the means to have simply moved the stone weeks ago. You could have resolved this without the confrontation, without bringing your friends into it, without any of it. Dumbledore's voice was even and genuine. Why this way? Harry thought about it. He looked at his burned wrist where Madame Pomfrey's treatment was doing its quiet work. He looked at the window where the sky was turning from black to gray to the first suggestion of blue. Because Quirrell needed someone to show up, he said. Not to fight him, not to take the stone from him, to actually show up, to be there for the thing that needed doing, which wasn't the stone at all. He paused. The stone was Dumbledore's plan. My plan was about the man who was being destroyed behind it. He turned the leather pouch over in his hands. I could have moved the stone and the fragment would have found another route, another host, another way back. The path to actually stopping it was through honesty, contact. The thing it had spent 50 years deciding was a weakness. Dumbledore was very still. You can't strategize around love, Harry said. You can only do it or not do it, so I did it. He shrugged because the alternative was making it sound larger than it was, and it hadn't felt large in the moment. It had felt necessary. That's all. A silence. Then Dumbledore said, quietly and with the specific weight of someone saying something they have been working toward for a long time, I think I owe you the truth about something else. Something I have been keeping because I believed I was protecting you from it. Harry waited. There is a prophecy, Dumbledore said. He told it plainly, which Harry respected. No hedging, no framing, no careful arrangement of words to soften the impact. The full prophecy, the one Trelawney had made before Harry was born, the one that had driven Voldemort to Godric's Hollow on that October night, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Harry sat with it. Ron had gone very still in the chair beside him. Hermione's quill had stopped moving. Either must die at the hand of the other, Harry said. Yes, you knew this before I started school. Yes, and you built your plan around it. Yes, Dumbledore said. He met Harry's eyes without flinching. You see now the full shape of what I was arranging. The reason I placed you with your aunt. The reason I intended to guide your development carefully toward a confrontation I believed was inevitable. I thought, he stopped. I thought I was doing what the situation required. I was instead doing what I was accustomed to. Managing, arranging, treating a child as a piece in a war I'd been fighting since before you were born. The power the Dark Lord knows not, Harry said. I assumed it was something to be developed, something you'd need to be prepared for. You were right that it was something he didn't know, Harry said. You were wrong that it needed development. He looked at the pouch of stones in his hands. I already had it. I'd had it since I was 9, sitting in a cupboard making a blanket out of nothing because I was cold, and teaching myself to navigate a house full of people who hated me without losing the part of me that didn't hate them back. He looked up. Love isn't a weapon you point. It's not a strategy. It's just what you do with the fact that other people are real. The room was very quiet. Hermione made a small sound that she covered by writing something down. You're not afraid of the prophecy, Dumbledore said. No, Harry said. Prophecies describe possibilities. They're self-fulfilling if you treat them as fixed. They become fixed because people who believe in them make choices that close off alternatives. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not going to spend my life arranging myself around a prophecy. I'm going to live, and the prophecy will find its own resolution. And if the resolution is the one the prophecy describes, then it'll be one I walked into freely, Harry said. For my own reasons, not because a man I'd never met decided before I was born that it was my destiny. He said it without heat, plainly. That's the difference. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Harry read through the Mind Stone what was moving in him, something large and complicated, not quite grief and not quite relief, the specific internal weather of a person reconsidering something they've built their life around. I'd like to propose something, Harry said, to replace the plan you had before. Go on, Dumbledore said. We work together, actually together. You have decades of knowledge about Voldemort, his history, his choices, the places he's been, and the people he was. I have the stones and the ability to do things that your version of magic can't do. Between us and with people we trust, he glanced at Ron and Hermione. We can find the Horcruxes and deal with them properly, not over years of careful, solitary investigation. Systematically, deliberately, you're proposing to go hunting for them. Starting next year, Harry said. This year is done, we're 11, we need rest and time and for Pomfrey to sort my wrist. He paused. But next year, yes, we start next year. I would want oversight, Dumbledore began. I'm not working for you, Harry said, not unkindly. I'm working alongside you. That's a different thing, and I need you to understand the difference before we agree to anything. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, with something that might have been the beginning of a different kind of smile than the one Harry had first seen at the start of term feast. You negotiate like someone who has already decided they'll walk away if the terms aren't right. I'm good at walking away when things aren't right, Harry said. I've had practice. He extended his unburned hand. Do we have an agreement? Dumbledore looked at the hand, looked at Harry's face. And Harry read through the Mind Stone the thing that moved through Dumbledore in that moment. The long, complicated motion of a mind that had been arranged one way for decades, reorganizing itself around a new understanding. Not defeated, not reluctant. Something closer to the feeling Harry had associated in the mirror with the kitchen and the warm cup and the people he loved. Something that looked a lot like the beginning of something real. Dumbledore took his hand. We have an agreement, he said, and shook it once firmly. Ron fell asleep in the chair sometime after sunrise. Madame Pomfrey put a blanket over him with the specific efficiency of someone who had stopped fighting the fact that teenagers would sleep in her ward if given the opportunity, and had decided that blankets were the appropriate response. Hermione sat cross-legged on the bed across from Harry with her notes spread around her and the focused quiet of someone in the middle of a project. Every so often she'd look up and write something additional and look back down. "The prophecy doesn't bother you," she said. "Not a question, it bothers me," Harry said honestly. "The part about neither can live while the other survives, that's a significant thing to be carrying. I'm not pretending otherwise." "But you're not," she searched for the word, crushed by it. How? Harry thought about how to answer this. He looked at the window where the Scottish sky had committed to morning now, blue and cold and clear. "Because I know what I am," he said finally. "Not what the prophecy says I am. Not what Dumbledore thought I needed to become. What I actually am, which is someone who found 6 impossible things when he was 9 years old and decided, alone in a cupboard, that they were his and he was going to understand them." He turned the leather pouch over in his hands. "The prophecy has an opinion about my future, so do a lot of people. The stones are mine. That's the thing that doesn't change." Hermione looked at him with an expression he'd come to think of as the one she wore when something had genuinely landed, not confirmed something she already knew, but arrived somewhere new. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that knowing more than everyone else was what made me safe. If I read enough and prepared enough and was right enough, nothing could surprise me." She looked at her notes. "And then you walked onto a train and started asking questions I didn't know the answers to, and I realized that what I'd built wasn't safety. It was just a very organized version of fear." "You're not afraid now," Harry said. "I'm terrified," she said. "But it's different. Before it was fear that something would catch me unprepared. This is," she thought about it, "this is fear that has a shape and a name so I can think about it." She paused. "Horcruxes, Voldemort, the fact that we're apparently going to spend our school years hunting down fragments of a Dark Lord." She looked up. "That's a very specific thing to be afraid of. It feels almost manageable." "Almost," Harry agreed. She smiled. It was small and dry and real. "We're going to need more books," she said. "The restricted section," Harry said. "I'll get Dumbledore to write a proper note now, a comprehensive one. It should specify by subject, not by title," Hermione said immediately. "Madame Pince responds better to scope of inquiry than to specific requests. It suggests genuine academic purpose rather than treasure hunting," Harry said. "I was going to say targeted information retrieval, but yours is more accurate." She started writing something. "I'll draft the language. You should get Dumbledore to sign it before he leaves the hospital wing." "He's already gone," Harry said. "He left 20 minutes ago." She looked up. "How do you?" Harry touched the leather pouch briefly and raised an eyebrow. "Right," she said and went back to writing. "I'll get it to him in the morning." "Properly morning." Harry lay back on the pillow and looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing, high, white, marked with the specific water stains of a ceiling that had been managing the Scottish weather for 600 years, and felt the castle breathing around him. Madame Pomfrey in her office, Quirrell in his bed, asleep now deeply, the specific quality of someone sleeping without company for the first time in 2 years. Ron in the chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him, the warm, uncomplicated presence of someone entirely at ease in their own skin. Hermione's sharp, focused energy, the scratch of her quill, the specific warmth underneath the precision. Outside, the grounds were waking. Groundskeeper Ronan moving somewhere near the forest, the lake alive with its own cold business underneath the ice that had formed at its edges. The 3-headed dog, all 3 heads asleep, dreaming something that felt to Harry like open space and running, which made him want to find a way to let it out in the ground sometime. He thought about the summer, Privet Drive, which he would return to, because Dumbledore had explained the blood protection, and Harry had understood it and agreed, on balance, that it was sensible. He would not go back to being the frightened, invisible boy who flinched at shouting. He'd go back as what he was, which the Dursleys would find deeply inconvenient, and he found he had no particular energy toward making it convenient for them. He thought about next year. The Horcruxes, the ones Dumbledore had named, the ones that were guesses, the ones that were still dark places on a map. He thought about what it meant to go looking for pieces of something that had tried to kill him and had instead, accidentally, marked him as its equal. He thought about the prophecy and the shape of what it might require eventually, and he let the thought exist without resolving it, because some things took time and forcing a resolution on them was how you got the wrong one. He thought about the kitchen in the mirror, the mismatched chairs, the woman with the red hair who laughed. He thought some of that is already here. The thought sat in him warmly like the stones. He was nearly asleep when Ron said from the chair without opening his eyes, "Harry, you're supposed to be asleep," Harry said. Ron said. Woke up. He shifted in the chair. You doing all right? Harry considered the question properly because Ron always meant it properly. His wrist felt better. The cold spot in the castle was gone. The stone was in Dumbledore's pocket on its way to becoming a question for Nicholas Flamel. There were Horcruxes somewhere in the world waiting to be found, and a prophecy, and a Dark Lord dispersed but not destroyed, and a whole year of school ahead of him after this one with all its ordinary complications. He was 11 years old and had more understanding of his own nature than most people gathered in a lifetime, and more to learn than he could probably calculate. Yes, he said. Actually, yes. Good, Ron said. He settled back in the chair. Me too. Hermione turned a page without looking up. Same, she said. Harry closed his eyes. The hospital wing was warm and quiet. The stones glowed softly against his hip, the 6 colors bleeding gently through the leather of the pouch. And somewhere in the castle, the portraits were waking for the morning, and in the kitchens, the house elves were starting breakfast, and in the owlery, 100 birds were watching the sun come up over the Scottish hills, with the untroubled attention of creatures that had decided the world was exactly as large as it needed to be. Harry Potter, 11 years old, with 6 impossible stones and 1 burned wrist and 2 friends who had been down into the dark with him and come back alongside him, not because he'd led them, not because they'd followed him, but because that's what you did for people who were real to you, lay in the hospital wing of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and breathed in and breathed out, and for the first time in his memory felt the clean, uncomplicated weight of a night that had gone as well as a night like that could go. Not perfectly. Nothing was perfect. Quirrell would heal into something complicated and uncertain. The Horcruxes were still out there, patient in their hiding places. Voldemort, dispersed and diminished, was still the kind of idea that didn't die easily. Dumbledore was still Dumbledore, brilliant and genuinely trying to be better, but carrying 60 years of doing things one way and 1 year of doing them differently, and those 2 things would conflict in ways that would require navigation. There was so much to do, so much to understand and find and deal with. Harry thought, good. He thought, I would hate it if there were nothing left to learn. He fell asleep as the sun came over the hills outside and sent long fingers of light across the hospital wing floor, and the stones glowed their 6 quiet colors, and the castle held all of them in its 600-year-old arms like it had been holding things worth keeping for a very long time and knew exactly how to do it. The express back to London was loud and warm and smelled like cauldron cakes and someone's escaped owl. Harry sat in the same position he'd sat in 9 months ago, middle of the train, back to the wall, watching the world go by, except that now Ron was beside him arguing the relative merits of cannons versus Puddlemere, with the sincere passion of someone who understood that cannons had no objective merits, and intended to defend them anyway, and Hermione had brought 6 books for the journey and was already on the second one. Occasionally reading passages out loud to either of them, without checking whether they wanted to hear them, because they always did. Neville was there too, Trevor in his lap, looking out the window with the settled expression of someone who'd had a better year than they'd expected and were still slightly surprised by it. He'd found his footing in herbology, which had gradually spread outward, a question asked in charms, a conversation started in the common room, the slow expansion of someone discovering that the world was more interested in them than they'd thought. Harry had watched it happen and said nothing about it, because the thing about that kind of growth was that naming it too directly made it self-conscious. Malfoy stopped at their compartment door an hour into the journey. He stood there for a moment. Harry looked at him. Malfoy looked at the compartment, at Ron with his cannon scarf, at Hermione and her books, at Neville and Trevor, at Harry, and then he said to Harry specifically, I heard something happened near the end of term. A few things, Harry said. Something involving Quirrell. Yes, Malfoy was quiet for a moment. He was doing the categorizing thing, Harry could see it, working out what was safe to say and deciding, in a way that seemed more genuine than strategic, that safety was less important than the question. He'll be all right, Harry said. He's staying at Hogwarts over summer while Pomfrey sorts him out. He'll be different next year. Whether that's better or worse, I don't know yet. Malfoy absorbed this. And the other thing, the whatever was in him. Gone, Harry said. Malfoy's face did something complicated. Harry watched it without comment. Through the Mind Stone, he usually kept it very quiet around Malfoy because Malfoy's privacy felt worth respecting. He caught the surface of what was moving in him. Relief, primarily. The specific relief of someone who'd been raised to regard something as terrifyingly powerful and has just learned it can actually be stopped. Right, Malfoy said. He looked at Harry for another moment. My father's going to have thoughts. I imagine, Harry said. He'll say the wrong side one, Malfoy said, and it came out quickly, like something he'd decided to say before he could talk himself out of it. He'll say that, he believes it. Do you? Harry asked. A longer silence. Malfoy looked at the floor of the corridor, then back up. I don't know what I believe, he said. I know what I've been told to believe. He paused. I think those are different things. They are, Harry said. The gap between them is where you actually live. He paused. If you ever want to talk about what's in the gap, I'm around. Malfoy looked at him with an expression that was complicated and young and trying very hard to be neither. Then he nodded the same small, precise nod from the train in September and left. Ron waited until his footsteps had faded. Are you going to make friends with Draco Malfoy? He said. Not exactly, Harry said. Then what? Something that doesn't have a name yet, Harry said. Give it time. Ron considered this. Fair, he said, and went back to arguing about Quidditch with nobody in particular. Hermione looked up from her book. The gap between what we're told to believe and what we actually believe, she said. That's good. It's just true, Harry said. Most good things are, she said, and went back to reading. The train moved south through green English countryside, the hills gentler here than Scotland, the sky wide and pale and full of summer. Harry turned the leather pouch over in his hands, felt the 6 stones warm and present in his, felt Ron beside him, warm and present and real in a completely different way. Felt Hermione and Neville and the whole loud living organism of the train full of students going home. Felt something far away, not Voldemort, not any immediate threat, just the distant fact of things unresolved, things to come, the unfinished shape of a story still in its early chapters. He was looking forward to it, not in the way you looked forward to something safe. In the way you looked forward to something you knew would be hard and were ready for anyway, the specific anticipation of someone who has looked honestly at what's coming and decided that the looking is better than the not looking, and the doing is better than the waiting, and whatever comes next will be met on its own terms, clearly, without fear. The train came into London. The platform noise came up fast and cheerful. People started pulling down their trunks and owls started their opinions about the journey, and Ron stood up and stretched with the full theatrical commitment of someone whose legs had been too long for any compartment ever built, and Hermione put her books away in order of size, and Neville held Trevor against his chest like a talisman. Harry stayed seated for a moment after the others started moving. Just one moment. Looking out the window at the platform, at the families coming through the barrier, at the ordinary chaotic warmth of a world going about its business. He thought about a kitchen. He thought about a table and chairs. He thought about the year ahead, which started with Privet Drive and ended, maybe, somewhere closer to what he'd seen in the mirror. He thought, one thing at a time. He stood up, picked up his bag, joined his friends on the platform. The world was large and complicated and full of things that needed doing, and Harry Potter walked out into it with the stones warm against his hip and nothing in his face that looked even remotely like fear. And the summer sun caught the scar on his forehead and made it look like a lightning bolt or a beginning or both. And the crowd closed around him, and he let it because crowds didn't mean what they used to. And somewhere behind him, the Hogwarts Express sighed and settled and waited for September. He was 11 years old. He had all the time in the world and not a moment of it to waste. He walked forward.